Hey there, how you doing? So this is a really interesting year, isn't it, astrologically? And literally within the next 6 days, we've got three really important astrological events for 2026 happening one after the other after the other. The first one of those is Saturn going into the sign of Aries, followed by our very first eclipse of the year, and then finally one of our biggest conjunctions of the year, which will be Saturn in a conjunction with Neptune. However, this is the very start of this cycle, and that's what I'm going to be concentrating on, focusing on in this video. I'm going to be examining all different sides of what it is to have Saturn in the sign of Aries. And then later on, I'm going to look at what happens with Saturn in Aries according to where it is in your birth chart. So, for instance, if you know what your ascendant sign is, and if you know where 0 Aries is in your birth chart, like which house is it in, then there'll be a forecast for you right at the end of this video. It's all chaptered, so you can kind of flick through all the different bits. But what I'm going to start with is really the story of Saturn, the story of Aries, how Saturn functions in the sign of Aries, because everywhere that Saturn goes, there's a very sort of different expression of what Saturn's about. And Saturn is a real hard taskmaster. He's really teaching us a lot about shape, form, creation, time, and really responsibility. He really bleats on about that. So this is going to be quite an important pivotal time, given that it's in the sign of Aries. It's the first sign in the zodiac. And yeah, I think there's going to be some repeating patterns. I'm definitely looking at what happened last time Saturn was in Aries, which was in 1996. I can already see some of those themes coming up, to explore, in fact. So let me bring up my slides and we'll go through this step by step. Like I said, you can flick through the chapters, but if you're happy to go on this journey with me, then just keep on listening. If you're new to this channel, by the way, my name's Louisa. Welcome to Feel Good Astrology. I hope you enjoy the ride. Anyway, let's bring up my slides right now. So Saturn in Aries, what is it all about? So in this, I'm going to be looking at who is Saturn, the myth of Saturn, a little bit about the planetary cycles, how he shows up natally, what he represents in your chart. What is Aries about? Just a quick whistle stop tour of that one. And then how Saturn might express itself in the sign of energy, in the sign of Aries, like what energy has he got? What's his shadow in the sign of Aries? I think Saturn really tests us quite a bit. So it's important to have a real clear view of how that shadow emerges. Just a little nano smidge of information about the very first degree of the zodiac and why it's important. And then I am going to do a little bit of a jump back in time, back into 1996. I've noticed that Dolly the sheep, if you're old enough and if you're from like the United Kingdom, you might remember this story. But back in 1996, I think the month after Saturn had changed signs, Dolly was the very first publicly cloned animal, and she was cloned in Scotland in 1996. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because the sheep, is, well, I mean, a ram. Aries is the ram. You can see down here, you've got the ram. The ram is a sheep. And Saturn is all about form and creating form. So it's quite funny. It's quite amusing, really, that Saturn in Aries, literally, the last time he went in, within a month, we had a sheep being cloned and publicly spoken about. So I was a bit like, oh, but astrology really shows us those patterns, and it really speaks to us out loud sometimes. And then, like I said, at the end, I'm going to be looking at Saturn in Aries through all the different houses of the birth chart. So there will be a forecast that will be applicable to you, where I'll give a little description of what's likely to come up. And again, if you remember what was going on for you between April 1996 and June 1998, that might also give you a clue as to what's coming up. So let's have a look at Saturn now then. So Saturn then, there's lots of different things that he's known for. Some of them are quite shocking. In his mythology, for instance, he ate all his children, which doesn't sound so good, does it? He's also known for castrating his father, Uranus, which sounds a bit gruesome and ghastly. And it's not something that many of us think of doing. So yeah, they've got a bit of a shocked face, but there is a much bigger story behind that. If you were to do a story of the mythology of Saturn, you're likely to get some different versions of it. And in many of these stories, Saturn comes across as a real big bogeyman, as somebody who, like, why would we like him? Why would we be interested in him, in our lives and stuff? And yet he really does have an important function that's going to come out. But first of all, I'm just going to talk about some of the things that we really know about him, that are quite evident. So Saturn is known as the keeper of oaths. He's absolutely really linked into legal things, laws. He's known as being quite unforgiving. He's known for being quite judgmental. Wherever Saturn shows up in your chart, he tends to show where we have some hard lessons to learn, and often ones where we're really judged on our performance. And so there's a really strong theme of oaths, like being your word and how you can be your word more and more. He's also known as being like a gardener of time. There's something with Saturn. He has very defined Saturn, a Saturn cycle where, like, for instance, we have our first Saturn cycle. It's called the Saturn return around the age of 29. And it's usually a time when we're held accountable for what we've done. And so we're aware of time creeping up. A lot of, I remember when I was growing up, there's this theme. I don't know if it still happens, but the idea of being on the shelf. I mean, again, I'm talking from a 50-year-old perspective. Back in my late teens and through my 20s, there was this idea that, there is a time to do everything. And so, Saturn is a really good timekeeper. He's also known as our old father time. He's known for being old. He's known for representing older men. He's kind of grandfatherly. He's also often read in your birth chart as being your father or an authority figure. He's also seen as like the energy of aging, the energy of maturation, like getting older, getting more mature. And, if we're lucky, where Saturn shows up, it shows where we've got a discernment and a wisdom, not like a fuzzy, ecstatic kind of wisdom that comes from just letting go and feeling really free and floating off, but, a hard won wisdom that comes from recognizing where you might be your own worst enemy and taking action on it. So, Saturn is pretty practical. And so we do often think of him, as marking time and sort of representing that. He's also a planet with rings. He's not the only planet with rings, but the symbolism of rings it's a bit like an imprisonment. That planet is imprisoned in his rings. We put rings on our finger when we commit to something. To me, like looking at those rings, you get this idea that Saturn might be quite limited. His alter ego, I guess you could say, like the other planet that he's often seen compared to would be Jupiter, who's actually Saturn's son. But Jupiter's a planet of expansion and things getting inflamed, but also things growing. And Saturn is seen as this planet of contraction and responsibility and things coming in. So he's actually a very helpful planet to have in he's always going to be somewhere in a birth chart. But for instance, if you're making an agreement, signing a document, getting married, it's really important to have a very strong and helpful and well aspected Saturn, because it's showing the nature of your bond. So, he's really bonding things. He's really known for his tests. When you work hard towards something, you kind of get rewarded for it. It's as if Saturn is watching you. He sounds like a judgmental bastard, doesn't he? Anyway, let me talk a little bit about the mythology. So his dad is Uranus, and Uranus was created from Gaia. Gaia is like Earth, and Gaia, she wanted company, and so she kind of puffed herself out, and she created she created the sky around her, or Uranus. She created him to surround her with stars, so that she had this kind of, I don't know, she had this birthing, she had this companion. So you had him as the god of the heavens and the sky. He was the air and she was the earth. She was the matter and he was the non-physical reality. And this was supposed to be great, the idea of this, but even though he surrounded her and they had lots of children, he didn't get involved in the incarnations. He kind of rejected her children, especially some of the ones that, he found a bit ugly. And so he was kind of seen as being up there in his heaven, up in the realm of thoughts and awakening, and he was all la-di-da, and she was living in the reality of it. And she really wanted to have that sort of proper physical birthing. She wanted to have that sense of creating matter on Earth. And so this is just one theory. And so she asked one of her children, which was Saturn, she asked her son Saturn to cut him away. And so he castrated his dad, and that caused the separation of the heavens and the earth. And then there was a much better way of doing things, so he was about awakening, Saturn was about initiating. And so there was this separation of heaven and earth, the idea of the godly realm and the very physical realm. That does fit into the idea of a fall from grace. Maybe Gaia was still attached to the grace, but wanted to incarnate and come back into a more physical reality. I mean, really what we're dealing with here is that very sort of physical separation from body and mind. And so that's one interpretation. There are others, and I've got them written down. So like one thought is that Uranus refused to incarnate. He wasn't wanting to be incarnate. He didn't want to have a body. And so Gaia wanted life on Earth. And with Saturn making that decision and going ahead, Saturn cuts away the sky, and in doing so creates time and form. Once that time of, like, that sky of possibility and awakening and all potential, and if you think about the etheric realms, there exists every single permutation of time and space, and that's where Uranus was. And so Saturn cutting away from that, gave us the fabric of time and form. And so, this is a really sort of strong moment when Saturn cut that away. Now Saturn came to have his own children, and this is where we get this other story. So he was told long ago that he would be usurped. One of his children would usurp him and take away his power. And so right from word go, he started eating his children, because he just didn't want to lose power. It felt like power was his domain. This is what he needed. And so he ate his children, and in the end his wife got a little bit eggy about it. She really wanted one of her children to live and to thrive. And so she gave birth to Jupiter, and rather than hand Jupiter over to him so that he got eaten, she wrapped up a stone in swaddling and gave the stone to Saturn. Saturn ate him up and thought, okay, that's all done and dusted. But Jupiter was hidden away in a cliff somewhere and in a cave. When he came of age, as he grew up, he started to learn a little bit about who he was. And when he found out that his dad had eaten his brothers and sisters, he went over and took action so that Saturn vomited out his siblings. He vomited out Pluto, he vomited out Neptune, he also vomited out Juno, Vesta, and Ceres as well. So there were 6 children, and Jupiter came and saved them. And of course, then Jupiter claimed his rightful place. At this time, there was Jupiter, Pluto, and Neptune, and then the Earth realm was separated out. So Jupiter became the new god of the sky, Pluto took all of the earth, and Neptune took the waters and the ocean. And so it was all divvied up. And then, so Saturn lost his place and Jupiter really sort of came forward into leadership. But would we have had that without Saturn cutting off that connection to Uranus, castrating his father? In other theories, Uranus was putting it about, and so he was castrated because Gaia was really feeling disrespected. But however it happened, Saturn has come in to create form. And he's also known as the sort of compression of spirit into matter. So he's a very important planet, because he's creating the form, he's creating the lived experience, not the imaginary experience that, Uranus is all in the head. Uranus is a higher harmonic of Mercury in many respects. And Uranus is absolutely seen as this awakening planet, this awakening energy. So yeah, that's some thoughts on Saturn. He's also known as Kronos, by the way, if you're Greek. Now he's got a 29 and 0.7 year cycle. So give or take like 29, 30 years, and he comes around again. Each cycle is an age. I don't know if that's an official term, but like your coming of age, it's really representing an epoch, especially with Saturn. Most people live through 2 Saturn returns. That takes you to 58, 59. If you're lucky, you might live through 3 Saturn returns. But for Saturn to get round to 0 degrees Aries is really special, because 0 Aries is the very first degree of the zodiac. The zodiac starts in Aries and it goes all the way around the story of the zodiac, all the way around to the last degree in Pisces, and then it crosses over. This is a really important point. It's known as, it equates to the vernal equinox. And so, yeah, these planetary cycles are always recorded from when they start, when they first go into Aries. So this is important. When he comes back to where he was, a whole 29 years ago, 30 years ago, his return is a test. We are reminded of where were we 29, 30 years ago? Where are we right now? What's changed? What have we learned? We're really growing up with Saturn, because this is about maturing and becoming more responsible. And so he's going to be in the sign of Aries for approximately 2.5 years. He's going to be there until April the 13th, 2028, when he goes into the sign of Taurus. So, yeah, this isn't just, any old planetary change. This is quite a significant one. And so like the next question is like, what are we learning with Saturn in Aries? Because, Saturn has all these different signs to express himself through. How does he express himself through the sign of Aries? That's the big question now. So, let's have a quick dip into what Aries represents. First of all, and this is one of my slides from, I'm teaching beginners astrology at the moment. So, at the moment, we're looking at one sign a week, and we're also looking at where our Aries is in our birth chart, or what planets are in Aries in our birth chart. So each week we're looking at a different sign and really going deep into it. But this is one of my slides from it. But Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars is a planet that takes action. It's a very forthright, thrusting kind of energy. Very much driven to defend and protect, very masculine, very physical. And so Aries takes on some of that vigor. Aries is also a fire sign, and fire signs are really hot. They're hot under the collar, they're hot in their temper and their temperament. They're really inspiring, really confident, and they're like a fire. It rages, it comes up quite quickly, quite unexpectedly, and then it can really blow itself out. So it's got that sort of tempestuous energy. It's also a cardinal sign. All 12 signs are either cardinal signs, fixed or mutable. So there's 4 cardinal signs. This is the fire cardinal sign. Cardinals are all about initiation. They're a bit on the bossy side. They like to take charge. They never ask for permission. They take charge. They take action. They see what they're going to do. They do it. And then they might seek forgiveness if it goes wrong, but they certainly don't wait around for consensus. Aries is a very direct sign. And if you think of the ram as well, it's really rutting. If you think of the ram with the big horns, it's unedited, it's raw, it's in the moment, it's kind of a bit shameless at times. It's the first sign, it's meant to come first. Aries is emergent, it's emergent leadership, it leads the way. Also, it considers itself first. It has a reputation of being selfish or putting itself first before everybody else. But there's always going to be a first and there's always going to be a last, and Aries just happens to fall into that description. So this is the sign of, or the planet of, responsibility in aging and limitations and shape and form, mixing with leadership and coming first. So it's not exactly charming. Saturn going into Aries isn't a charm fest. It's really, really not a charm fest. It's not winning medals for being the nicest, kindest placement. Definitely not. It's in your face and it's strong and probably quite harsh as well. Now, Aries, if I just go back, if we were to look at this as a whole wheel going from 0 Aries right the way around to the 360th degree or the 259th degree, because it's 360 and that would equal 0. So there are, between the 12 signs, there's 30 degrees in each sign. It goes from 0 to 29, then 30 to 59, and all the way around until you get to 259, and then you come back round to the first degree again. So we've got 30 degrees in the sign of Aries, and this is the very, very first degree. This is known as the Aries point. It's the start of the zodiac or the ecliptic belt. It's a whole new story. It's a whole new incarnation. It's like the birthing of a new day. The first day of spring happens at the vernal equinox, which equals 0 Aries. And so it's a degree that is associated with new potential. Now, there are these things called Sabian symbols, whereby there's one symbol or one description for every single degree of the zodiac. And I happen to like the interpretations that Linda Hill has put out there. And you can see her interpretations if you go to sabiansymbols.com. It's really easy to find. Now, what you do when you get to her site is you put in the degree that you're looking for and the sign that you're looking for, and you hit enter. Now, you might see that this is actually 0 Aries, but it gets rounded up to 1. In her system, you have to put in the degree you're looking for, and it will always get rounded up, but it's meant to be like that. But this particular degree has a really interesting forecast. And I think this adds something to the story. So as Saturn is coming into the sign of Aries on the 14th of February, on Valentine's Day, this is equivalent to the energy of a woman that's risen out of the ocean. A seal is embracing her. This degree is the beginning of the zodiac where the old gets left behind. It's a new understanding and awareness coming to light. Something new is emerging. It needs to be welcomed and nurtured. This is the beginning of a whole new impulse, creative and responsive. There's an emergence of a whole new potentiality. Resist looking back over your shoulder to outgrown and unsatisfactory conditions in your life, because they're going to pull you back to the old and the very sort of unrewarding ways of being. This is about finding your voice and finding your feet. Beginnings, emergence of the feminine in concrete manifestation. It's an interesting one. Cycles beginning. The beginning of spring or autumn, according to which hemisphere you're living on. If you're in the northern hemisphere, it's the beginning of spring. It's confidence in the whole new arena of being, shedding old skins. So this is really holding the momentum and the energy of something like we are stepping forwards. We're stepping forwards in life in a new direction. When this energy kind of gets out of kilter, you can recognize it because we're using the masculine drive to overshadow the emotions. We're refusing to move into a new state of being, like we're trying to hold on to stuff that's come before in our previous life experience. And so what this is really saying is it's gone, it's done. It is time to just shut the door and move forwards. So, this is interesting. We've got Saturn completing one whole cycle and moving forward. So we're on a new cycle of responsibility. And I guess the question is, what are you going to do with it? So this is the question, what are we learning with Saturn in Aries? Well, the energy of Saturn in Aries is often associated with initiation, courage, like finding courage, even when we're feeling restrained. Remember, he's got the limits around him. He's got those rings around him. Like, how is our will, our impulse, how is that maturing? We're tested on our identity. Aries is absolutely known for the identity and coming in strong. This is about our authority. Like, how can we be authoritative, more into our authority than our impulse, which is the Aries? Because Aries is go, 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 and not let's think things through and make sure they work. Aries, the Aries energy is where we consider ourselves to already be an authority and we move forwards without completely considering things. So I do think, we are going to have to consider our authority and how we do it a bit differently. Where we're taking action, it's going to last. So we want to make sure we're taking the right action. We're learning how to begin and how to lead ourselves. This is very much about accountability for the past and for our past anger, our fieriness. Where has that led us? And is there something that we're meant to be learning with it? It's also showing us the boundaries around the Aries drive, so are you meant to be completely in your Aries energy and setting the world ablaze? Or are you going to be a bit constrained in that or a bit more discerning in that? So it's a very interesting dynamic. It's not one that fits very easily, together. You might also have a fear of starting or come into a mastery of starting. So I would say that's a progression. Maybe you're learning how to start really well. Now, where it goes very wrong, and this is where the shadow comes out, is you can be really harsh with your self-judgment. Because Saturn is very, very harsh and judgy. And of course, with Aries, this sort of Aries energy, which is fiery, you could be really, really critical. You can get very frustrated over delays and get very frustrated and angry. You might be sort of trying to control things too much with your instinct. So instead of moving forwards in an authoritative way, you might be trying to control all the outcomes and be a bit of a despot. There could be a real stop-start energy and a blocked momentum. So there's quite a few themes. If we have a look at what was going on last time, so I've already mentioned about, and obviously lots can happen in 2.5 years, but Dolly the sheep, the first publicly cloned, and I say that publicly because I suspect what we see in the public domain has already been done many times over, but it's significant that it's public because, with publicity, it's like the start of something. It's like an announcement, and an announcement is very much like Aries energy, which is like the first step on the journey. So it's interesting that Dolly the sheep, I wonder why she was named Dolly, but she was first publicly cloned sheep born. Very interesting. I wonder if the people that were doing that were thinking, we're gonna clone a sheep just in time for Saturn in Aries. I really wonder, because it's so funny, really. But it doesn't all stay funny. There's some pretty big things here. These are just some of the big obvious things, and some of these do have more of a weight towards the UK. That's where I grew up. And also where I'm from. So there was Charles and Diana's divorce, if you followed the royal family in the UK. Later on, Lady Diana died in a car accident, all happening during this time. There was the Port Arthur shooting. So if you grew up in Australia, you'll be really well aware of that. That will be a huge thing in your consciousness. There was a TWA flight 800. It exploded over the Atlantic, and I think 230 people died. That was a pretty big thing. Now, back to the UK, there was a lady, funnily enough, called Diana as well, Diana Blood, which is quite an interesting name. But she won the right to her dead partner's sperm, that she could have another child, like have a child with, her partner's sperm. That was a big case. I remember that. Over to America, Bill Clinton was banning federal funded human cloning. So it's interesting, isn't it? That's 3 different things to do with the creation of life, 2 to do with cloning. So in Scotland, they were cloning animals. In America, they were saying, we're not going to fund. Now, it wasn't banned, but it's saying we're not going to fund human cloning. That's not to say it hasn't happened. And of course, in the UK, there was a big discussion about sperm. So, that to me feels a bit like a pattern, doesn't it? There was also a chemical weapons conference, the return of Hong Kong to China. Similarly, Wales voted back for Welsh autonomy. So there's this feeling of a return or a sovereignty, or people deciding where they're going, what's going on. In England, New Labour was rising up in the UK, led by Tony Blair. It was interesting. He got a lot of press around the time of Lady Diana's death, and the royal family at that time were having really, really bad press. They had a real sort of PR problem back then. And within a month, I think, of Lady Di dying, and to the UK, she was almost seen as a surrogate mum, even though she was a young woman. She was seen as like the mother of England in many ways. So many people idolized her, and I think that's probably why it created so much of a bad sort of publicity to the royal family. It appeared that there wasn't a very good relationship between them. And then after that, Mother Teresa died. So it's kind of like 2 mothers, 2 public mothers, or 2 revered mothers. So they are some themes that I've really picked up on. The idea of autonomy, like the divorce and returning to how you want to be, and maybe countries becoming their own state, or coming into a relationship with, a parent company, in a way that feels more in alignment. So to me, there's this feeling of autonomy of where you want to go. The passing of the mother, the idea that Diana and Mother Teresa died. And of course, Saturn is known as the father. And, in the strong sign of Aries, maybe as the father arrives, the mother dies. Who knows? To me, I think astrology really shows us the polarities of things. And so if there is a strong father, a strong male archetype coming, then it is quite possible that we would be losing that feeling of the mother. Themes of responsibility and birthing, which funnily enough has to do with the mother. But again, here, this is taking the responsibility of I didn't even see this before, but if we're considering sperm, animal, human cloning, like unnatural birthing, or birthing, it is unnatural. Like there's a way that births happen naturally. And there are discussions, or there were last time in 1996, about the responsibility of birthing. So again, there is the removal of the mother, the idea that the mother isn't necessary, maybe, just a thought. And there's pressure to move on. There's this pressure that we must be moving on. So, my question to you is, if you can remember what you were doing back there, how were you reclaiming your autonomy? How were you reclaiming your authority? What were you doing in your life to really move forwards in that Aries way, like to come into your own self-leadership, which is a really strong theme? So what was going on? Because this Saturn has come around, he's taken 30 years, 29 years, he's come back round to that place of 1996. And so there's a repeating pattern about to take place. And this is a really, really strong year. It's interesting as well, because if we have a look at what happened when Saturn went into Aries in 1996 versus now, there are several key shared patterns. Now, I love patterns. I'm always looking at patterns. And I think I pick up on a lot of patterns that not everyone else does. I really sort of like prize myself on it. But looking back at 1996, we had a minor grand trine between Saturn, Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, which is not the same this time around, but it's very, very similar. Uranus, Neptune and Pluto are all at the tail end of a sign or at the beginning of a sign. They are all in those positions right now. Neptune, which is a really slow moving planet, is in a conjunction with another slow moving planet. That's happening right now. And when Saturn went into Aries back in 1996, it was in between two eclipses. So one eclipse had just happened a few days before, and then there was another like 10 days later. That's really similar to what's going on right now. So, I've marked out all of these patterns. This is like showing the eclipse pattern. This is the minor grand trine. And here the planets are slightly moved around. Pluto's lagging, Pluto's always behind. And Neptune is always in a sextile. For us in this lifetime, Neptune is always going to be in a sextile to Pluto. So that's the same. This time round, we got Saturn with Neptune. But last time round, Saturn was at this far end. So Saturn and Uranus are in different positions with these minor grand trines. But to me, that's a repeating pattern. It's really, really similar. And all of the planets are, all of these slow moving planets, these are the 4 slowest moving planets, Pluto being the slowest, Neptune followed, then Uranus, then Saturn last of all. These are the 4 slowest moving planets, all working in alignment together. Saturn going over this 0 Aries around the time of the eclipses. Now, we don't have an eclipse before this happens, but Saturn this time round is going into Aries on the 14th. 3 days later, we have got an eclipse just here. And then 2 weeks after that, we've got an eclipse just here. So I think this is a very similar pattern, a very similar setup. Now, to me, when I look at that, what I'm thinking is we've got a whole Saturn cycle coming full circle. And so some of the previous themes that were going on in 1996, 1998 are coming to terms. They're coming full term. It's like we are, in fact, I wrote it up here. In 1996, it feels like we were imagining the futures. We were in this creative space of, people were living their lives in the way that they saw fit. They were creating new ideas to do with birthing, rethinking around cloning and the nature of life. Public divorces were, especially like the royal family, I think is a really big theme. I just think the ideas of how we were living, it's like we were dreaming something very new for ourselves. And I think now we're coming into a time where we're living in the outcomes of our dreams before. Now, me saying that doesn't mean to say I'm judging the past 30 years going, no, because I'm really not. But I do think we are going to have the weight of that previous cycle coming up in our consciousness right now. And, maybe we're going to see the evidence of what's happened since. I mean, it's no mean feat. It's incredible to think that actually it's been almost a whole Saturn cycle since Diana's passing. It just seemed like yesterday. So yeah, like the future here was really quite kind of interesting and flexible. And now we're coming into a time where we're really starting to take a lot more responsibility. I say that because Neptune has also just crossed over into Aries as well. So we're on a new spiritual journey as well as a new journey of responsibility. Before Neptune and Uranus were just working together, sort of creating anything. And of course, this is also affecting a generation. So the last time this happened, we were at the tail end of the millennial generation. So, now this one's coming up. All the millennials are all really grown up, and the Gen Zs are also coming into their power as well. They're all about to turn, the older ones are about to turn 30. So to me, I really think the tail end of the millennials and the beginnings of the Gen Zs are coming into a massive time of change and responsibility. I think it's going to be interesting to see what they're coming up with right now. And similarly, actually, anyone that's just about to turn 58, 59, you know, so if you were born with Saturn in Aries 60 years ago, like 58 to 60 years ago, you're also coming into a new prominence. You know, this is a really, really strong cycle for you too. Speaking about strong cycles on that 60-year time frame, you know, this is happening 3 days before the first eclipse of 2026. Now, it just so happens that it coincides with the Chinese New Year. The Chinese New Year is a fire horse year, and the fire horse happens every 60 years. But this is very significant. The Chinese New Year doesn't always start with an eclipse. It starts with the second new moon since the solstice, the winter solstice. So this is unusual. You know, the fire horse comes around every 60 years, but it's also an eclipse. This is predicted to be a year full of masses of change, and Saturn in Aries is setting it off. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot going on. So before I look at all of the sign by sign forecasts, I just wanted to put this in just to help you out, you know, because if you're wondering which of these you should look for, you could. What I would recommend is when you look at your birth chart, if you've got one sign per house, these are the houses, 1, 2, 3, right the way through to 12. If you've got one sign in each house, then just go to the sign of your ascendant. You know, so if that's Virgo, listen into Virgo. If that's Cancer, listen into Cancer. But when you look at your birth chart, you see that there's a starting place. In the first house, you've got, say, Aries and Taurus in the whole first house. Then you want to look for a particular house number. So what I recommend you do is you bring up your chart, and I recommend using www.astro.com. That's the one I've been using for years, and it's absolutely amazing. It's very, very easy to create your chart. If you don't know how and you want guidance, please do check out my video. I've got a short video, really short video. I don't know what it's called, but it's something like how to create your chart. It's really easy. Go to that video. It will talk you through how to create your chart. When you do that, and you might not use astro.com, I also recommend astroseek.com. They're really good as well. But there's always a way to add in the transits. What that means is this is your birth chart, like where everything was at the time, place, and date of your birth. But around the outside, this shows where the planets are right now. And so what you want to do is create your chart and look for the transits. And then you need to locate where Saturn is right now. And Saturn looks like an H, the letter H, with a line through it at the top. And you can see there's Saturn in the birth chart. And this is actually a birth chart of somebody who is coming into their Saturn return. They've actually got their Saturn in the sign of Aries. But if you're looking at the transits, you want to see where Saturn is. And it's just here, ever so slightly just here. So my question is, which house is Saturn in? And so the answer for this person would be it's just ever so slightly in the 6th house. And so what you would be doing is you would be looking for Saturn in the 6th house, and that would give you the right place to go. Or you could, once you know that Saturn's going into the 6th house for you, you could just go onto Google or to AI or whatever and say, tell me about transiting Saturn going into my 6th house. And boom, there will be a little bit of an interpretation for you. So that's how you could do it yourself. So what I'm going to do is have a little break and then come back and talk about Saturn going through the houses, He's this red planet. You can see, according to where he is, he'll be highlighting a different part of your chart. And I'm going to be really talking about what that impact is going to be over the next 2.5 years. So stay tuned. So if you have an Aries ascendant, if you're, a whole sign person, or if you have Saturn in the first house currently or going into the first house, so you might actually have Pisces ascendant. This is going to be quite an important time. If Saturn has already been in your first house for a while, you already will know that he's making you feel a lot older than usual. That's really, really normal. The last time we went through my first house, I felt very, very creaky, and I really sort of brought myself into this new time of going to the gym, getting my alignment sorted out. It's a really, really good time to straighten up. But now that Saturn, he's going into Aries as well, this is where you're really taking responsibility for self, so it feels almost like this is the time of your life that you've been waiting for. This feels like a really important time, to become the person you've been waiting to be. It's very much about responsibility. So you might be looking very much about what you've been doing for years and years and years. Where has it been leading you to? What might you need to stand up for? Remember, Aries is a very defensive at times sign. It absolutely marks its territory, and it defines its identity quite well. You might also be thinking in terms of how you can earn a little bit more in terms of your confidence. Like Saturn makes us work a little bit harder usually. And so you might really be working on your self-confidence. The first house is a place where confidence can be enhanced, or it can be really sort of chipped away at. And Saturn coming into your first house can, if you don't feel like you're up to the job, if you don't feel like you're up to the job of yourself, it can sort of cut away at your confidence a little bit. So this is a time when it's important to be building yourself up, not knocking yourself down. Now, one of the things I also think is wherever your thoughts are leading you, Saturn is going to add so much more gravitas and seriousness to your thoughts. Now, if you believe that we're in a co-creative universe, and if you believe in the law of attraction, then you absolutely want to listen into what you're saying to yourself. Because if you're saying to yourself, oh, I'm feeling really old, oh my God, I feel really creaky, oh my God, why don't I ever get this right? How come I'm here? Blah, blah, blah. You're going to be creating more of that for yourself. And it's going to compound quite quickly in the first house. So I do think you're going to need a lot of discernment with yourself, and to learn not to take things too personally. So have your goal of where you want to go, but maybe set it over time, so that you don't feel like you're not achieving it. If you're just focusing on one goal, that could just feel so enormous that you're going to feel quite put off, right from where go. So my advice is that you set yourself small little outcomes, just so all you have to do is reach the next outcome, and then the next one, and the next one, and the next one, because that way, you can work with it with some gusto, because it's a short burst. Each short burst, which Aries will really like, is leading you to, feel a bit deeper, to go a bit stronger, to take more responsibility. So yeah, this is a time when you're really defining yourself. Now, if, in recent times, Saturn would have been in your 12th house. And during that time, he's probably knocked your confidence quite a bit. In the 12th house encapsulates our fears. It encapsulates our self-sabotage. It's also a place where we don't feel like we have much energy. And it can also be a time when we feel kind of mentally unwell, a little bit depressed, not very certain of ourselves. The 12th house is a place where, our story starts to unravel and it starts to dissolve away a little bit. And so, and I remember the last 2 times that Saturn was in my 12th house, and how heavy things felt, the sort of heaviness of the thoughts I was having. And so I really also, think that you're really you're building yourself back up from this time. And if you know how to read astrology, if you can work out when Saturn was in your 12th house, and you can kind of like retroactively look at what was going on and sort of correlate it, you realize that where you are right now, you are in the building up phase. And it's really important that you pay that attention to yourself, because in the first house, Saturn is coming around to take you on a new journey of responsibility. So the more effort you're putting in right now, the better off you'll be. And especially if you feel like you haven't been very well, if you are really sort of disciplined with yourself, and with Aries in the first house as well, there's usually a little bit more energy to keep fit, or to be active, and and to determine things. So I really think if you've got some kind of fitness that's going to allow you to feel more flexible, more strength in your core, in your muscles, in your bones, get everything aligned, especially with your head, like cranial sacral therapy could be very, very helpful, because it's working on your alignment and absolutely on your head. Anything on anywhere where your skull has felt compacted, to me, all of that is going to really help you build confidence and feel so much better. And you're really setting off on a new direction. The next place that Saturn will be going into, and it's not just yet, it's not until 2028, but he will be moving in towards your second house. And when he comes into there, he's going to be transforming your money. Now, of course, if you've already built your confidence up and you're feeling good in your body, and you feel healthy, you feel fit, you feel like you're up to the job of yourself, when he comes into that part of your chart about money, you're already on a roll. You're ready to kind of sell yourself more. You're ready to put a higher price on yourself and your services. But of course, if you're run down when he goes into that part, that part of your chart about your money, you're not really walking forwards with that Saturnian momentum. And that's the thing with Saturn. You can have a long, slow, but gradual rise. And when you look at a plane on a runway, or if you're driving your car, you don't go from 0 to 60 straight away, or mostly you don't. You're putting your foot down, and you just start to get faster and faster and faster and faster. But it starts off gradually, and it has to. You have to get your body conditioned, you have to get your mind conditioned to get on this journey. And the more consistent you are at it, the faster and the smoother your journey will be. So I really honestly can't stress enough how important this is right now. And because you've also got Neptune there, that leads into a whole nother conversation, which I'll be covering off in another video real soon. Just a final thought. This is talking about where Saturn is right now. If you know where Saturn is in your actual birth chart, then I've already recorded a playlist on this channel quite a while ago called Saturn Through the Houses. If you were to find where Saturn is, you can actually also listen to how he is in your natal chart, and what might happen that way. It's not generic to Saturn in a particular sign. It's just through the houses. That might also be helpful to you. So have a great one. Good luck on this Saturnian journey through your first house. And if I can be of any help, just get in touch. Lots of love. Bye for now. Now, here, he's really encouraging you to master your mind. The 12th house, if you look at the birth chart as a wheel of development, and each of these houses is taking you further and deeper on your journey, as you come round to the 12th house, this is the last chapter. If you think of a book, it has a start, has a middle, and it has an end. And, with endings, the story falls away. And that's what's going on right now. Is you're coming into the end of a story about responsibility. Saturn, he has created form and shape. That's one of the things that he does. And he helps us to grow in confidence. He helps us to grow in stature. He helps us to formulate our life and take, help take shape and form. And we take responsibility for things. And, so when Saturn's in the 12th house, it's often showing us that, there is, you're about to go on a much deeper journey in a couple of years' time in terms of responsibility. And some of the responsibilities that you currently hold are maybe not as important anymore. Maybe they're changing. Maybe the responsibility you have for yourself is also changing. So we have to also think about what's going on in the 12th house. The 12th house is a place of the unconscious energy. So it carries every single memory that you've had. If you believe that the unconscious mind captures every single lived experience. We might not be consciously aware of it, but unconsciously there's millions of bits of information stored there. I always think of it as the ocean. The ocean, you could have a look in, you might be able to see, a certain distance away from your hand, but you can't see anything else. But that's not to say there's nothing in the ocean. We know it's full of different creatures and lots of different things going on, but we can only see what gets lit up, where we shine the light on things. And so, this is a place where there can be lots of things hidden away, like anxieties, fears, hurts, memories from the past that you remember every now and again. If something triggers it, if something comes along and you're like, oh my God, that feels really weird. What's going on? The 12th house is also where we start to let go of the story of who we've been. So usually when Saturn is coming around here, he is showing us where we've lived our life in a certain way. And it really is time to kind of let go of this, it almost looks like where you've been growing and putting down form, it's no longer viable. It can feel like it's time to discipline, time to let go, time to really declutter what's been going on. And so that's really where the energy is. You might not feel quite so confident. You might not feel like a party animal. In fact, where he's just been in the 11th house, that would have been a time when you'd felt a lot more, maybe it would have shown you some of sort of different experiences socially. It's a lot more busy. There's a lot more things, of importance that you're working on. But yeah, when he comes in here, it's actually time to have a bit of a rest. It's time when you want to put your feet up. You don't want to do too much. You just want to reflect, get your thoughts in order. Now, one of the things I would say is your unconscious drives, like your unconscious patterns that come up a lot. It is time to have a look at those, because you might have responses that are really detailed and patterned and have been for years and years and years. It could be to do with a habit that you've got. It could be to do with a trauma that you've got, a trauma response or an attachment response that, hasn't healed, hasn't matured. And of course, Saturn is all about maturity. Now, at the same time, he's going to be in the sign of Aries. And so he is wanting you to take action on those parts of your brain or those parts of your behaviors that aren't quite right. So even though you're taking a bit of quiet time, he's asking you to be quite disciplined. So this is a time to to maybe demonstrate spiritual discipline or an emotional discipline. This could be a really good time to go into some kind of therapeutic process, a therapeutic relationship with yourself, possibly with the guidance of somebody else, quite possibly somebody older, possibly a male, given that Saturn, really shows up as an older man. But this is where you're growing mastery. So, for a lot of people, I'm guessing, like the Western idea of what life looks like and how busy we are, probably hearing that Saturn coming into the 12th house, is a little bit, it doesn't feel like it's really exciting. It sounds like it's a little bit shy, a little bit retiring. It doesn't sound that appealing, most likely. But if you could think of it in the terms of, maybe a monk or, a spiritual teacher, they might go into this phase before they start to come forwards in their own right, with their new thought forms, with their new ways of being. So to me, this is the necessary stage that we go through before we come forwards with all seriousness about ourselves. I just want to put it into some kind of greater context, like the whole Saturn story for you. So where Saturn's just been, in the sign of Pisces and possibly also in your 11th house, you've been learning about connections. You've been learning about people that you can work with and collaborate with. You've been learning where you can put your skills to a much better use. You've also, I think, been learning that you can't always trust everyone. And to have a lot more discernment with the people that you want in your life. And so, this is, in many respects, this phase in time is to let go of the connections, the access that people have to you, so that you're not quite so accessible, you're not quite so available to people, that you're more discerning with your space. That you're giving yourself space first. You're putting yourself first, which I think is really quite lovely, in fact. And where you're moving up to, the next step, and that will be in 2028, Saturn's going to be coming into potentially your first house. That's going to be his next step, but also into the sign of Taurus. And when he comes there, to me, it feels like all of the behaviors that you've almost course corrected during this time, you're going to be moving forwards with a whole new identity. So to me, this is a real necessary, but also quite interesting time of letting go of the old you. And then this whole new you is coming. Older, sure, quite possibly stronger, more disciplined, more discerning. You'll mean business. You'll take yourself seriously. You're not going to be rushing around for other people necessarily. You'll make decisions with clarity. So I think this is a really interesting time for you, and I'm wishing you a really good, lead into it. If you know where Saturn is in your birth chart, and you'd like to hear my take on it, I have a separate playlist called Saturn Through the Houses. And I've recorded something for every single house. So just go look that up. And that will also give you a bit of information about your internal Saturn, your internal discipline. I did record it about, I think, 4, maybe 5 years ago. But it's not specific to Saturn in Aries. This is about where it was at the time, place, and date of your birth. So anyway, hope that's of help to you. Wishing you lots and lots of love. If I can be of any help, then just get in touch. All of my details are below in the show notes. Lots of love. Bye for now. Okay, so there's a couple of options here. This is if you have Saturn in your 11th house right now, going into the sign of Aries. So there's a couple of possibilities. You might have Gemini rising, and you might be a whole sign fan. This might be like this is a whole sign chart here for you. But if you've got Saturn already in your 11th house, or just going into your 11th house, you might also have your ascendant in the tail end of Taurus. Whatever your story behind it, if your Saturn in Aries is in the 11th house, this is the forecast for you right now. So what I want to do is lead you through what's likely to come up over the next couple of years. He's going to be there until I think June or July 2028. So he's going to be there a while. Now, Saturn going into the sign of Aries is asking you to take a lot more active responsibility. But through the 11th house, this takes on the story of groups, social responsibility, also groupthink. And I also think in terms of the law of attraction as well. The 5th house here is where you're creating for yourself. It's a place of where you're filling up on your own levels of passion. But here in the 11th house, this is where your passion meets the energy of other people's passion. This is a place of collaboration, friendships, groups, networks. Now, I always like to put things into a bit of a story. And so let's just start this off by where Saturn has been moving through in recent history. He has been in your 10th house. He's been working through your 10th house, and Saturn through here is really asking you to stand up tall, to face a level of responsibility that you may or may not have been ready for, but he really is asking you to stand up strong. This is your time to rise. This is your time to take on greater responsibility. This is the time where you could actually manage people, do well in your career, not always without challenges, but all of those challenges, Saturn does like to challenge us and test us a little bit. Those challenges are there to help you grow in stature. And so that's where we are as you're starting this story in the 11th house. So my question to you is, what have you been learning recently about your stature that now enables you to kind of spread out your influence? You know, I really see that Saturn going through the 10th has given you a greater level of influence, but he's also been going through the sign of Pisces as well. And so I would assume that even though you've grown in influence, you've also probably grown tired of traditional authority, tired of who you consider to be an authority figure in your life. And, you know, in that reaction, you might want to do something a bit more socially focused, a bit more focused on a group vision, a vision that, you know, you can get involved in with other people. To me, this is about lighting up your life with a sense of collective passion, not your own passion. You know, you've already developed that in many different respects, but now this is a time for you to grow with a sense of collective responsibility. Now, during this time, like if you are doing this through your job, for instance, you know, a lot of people, I think, you know, when they go up in the world, they start to then think, well, I've already achieved this, but actually, you know, getting to the top didn't feel that satisfying. How can I feel a bit better? Like, you know, if you're very wealthy, you might decide, you know what, I'd like to put my wealth to much better use. Or if you've got lots of experience, but you don't feel like it's really being fully used, you might think, well, how can I use my experience in a way that's going to feel more fulfilling? And that's where you are right now. You know, you're coming into a new cycle of fulfillment. And so during this time, what usually happens is that groups become a lot more important. I would also say, if you are in a blended family, this can also show where there's a lot more importance on stepchildren, a lot more importance on the blend of a family, if that's the situation you find yourself in. You know, this is bringing you into the midst of a greater number of people who maybe have come to you via other friends, like friends of friends, or they're the children of your partner. You know, it's not necessarily your friends, it's not necessarily your children. This has an element of the other added into it. So what often happens with Saturn here is we're called to take responsibility for extra people, or we're called to perform a function within a group. Now, me saying called, to me, I don't think you have to wait for that call. If you're already feeling that in yourself, most likely you'll be already recognizing this and saying, oh yeah, Louisa, I know exactly what you're talking about, because right now this is what's going on, blah, 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 blah. And you may well be at the initiation side of this. You see, you know, Saturn isn't just in the 11th house, it's in the sign of Aries, and Aries is very initiatory, and you have the initiation sign of Aries in your 11th house. So you have that level of taking action and being right on the money, you know, in terms of friendships and getting things moving. And so I do think you've got a really big role ahead of you. One of the difficulties with this is that sometimes the Saturn types of people can be a real pain in the ass. So you might find that you need a lot of discernment. You might find that you're going to get a little bit tested on your judgment of other people. So if something, you know, sounds a bit too good to be true, most likely it is a little bit too good to be true. That's not to say you can't trust people, but I do think, you know, with Saturn going through the 11th house, it can be a bit of a trial. with some, with people. It's not always easy. Saturn does show us where things can get a little constrained and a little bit difficult. Also, remember, you've got Neptune going into the 11th house as well. And Neptune is a bit of a foggy planet. So with Neptunian types coming into your life and also Saturnian types coming into your life, you're going to have to really keep your finger on the pulse. Make sure that if you are working in group situations, that you really know who you can trust, and that you've got very strong ways of dealing with people that you can trust. So I do think this is going to be testing your skills with the tribe for sure. I do also think that you could really be working for some very serious causes. There will be some big things that come up for you with this position, and you'll feel like now is the time that you're going to take action, and you'll find loads of similar minded people around you ready to work with you. So this is a very, very purposeful place to have Saturn going through your chart over the next couple of years. Now, this is also a place of contributions. So again, that can be, you might find that you're contributing your time, maybe your money, maybe your experience, but it does feel a time when you're paying your dues. You really are feeling that. A couple of final thoughts. If you've already sort of developed your career, or you've got a really good idea, you've sort of grown in confidence and stature over the last couple of years, you might be ready to spread your ideas out and have a lot more influence and sort of exert a bit more influence. And this can be quite a helpful time, because one of the things that I think show up in the 11th house is funding structures. I think big charities, and like government funding, funding from the EU, funding from all sorts of different places can crop up. If you've got an idea that's worth sharing, if you've got an idea that could set the world alight with joy or compassion or something like that, then this could be a really powerful time for you to get the energy and the collaboration of some really, really big players. It's not just that you're working with potentially stepchildren or groups maybe locally or further afield. You could actually be working with some really big, heavy hitting, influencing influencers or government positions. There's a lot riding on this. This actually could be a really, really good time for you. This could actually really send you up into a much bigger place. My final thoughts then, this is also a time when the law of attraction works really beautifully. Like, if you think of it as a collaboration, what greater collaboration could there be than you collaborating with the power of life, or the power of the universe, or the power of God, or Jesus? This is a time when your prayers, I think, are heard. This is a time to be creating and expecting somebody to be creating with you, whether it's somebody, an entity, an energy, a source of divine wisdom. There is the energy of co-creation that is coming in for you, and it would be a real shame for you to lose sight on that, because I think that's actually the thing that can lift us up in a much more beautiful way. Final thought about this is, after this eases off, Saturn will be moving on to the next part of his journey. In 2028, he'll be coming into the 12th house. Now, this is a natural time of endings and a natural time of resting and recuperating and kind of going into the dark a little bit to formulate a new plan, because soon after, he will be coming into the first house again, and he'll be taking on a whole new journey of success, a whole new journey of maturation, growing, becoming wiser, and so on and so forth. So, whatever you're working on right now, think of it in terms of, how can I use this energy for the next couple of years? And expect it to come to an end. Expect to have some downtime after it, because if you're already expecting that, you'll go gracefully into the 12th house when it comes. So I hope that's helpful for you. I have some other resources with Saturn. I did create a podcast called Saturn Through the Houses. If you go and have a look at the different playlists in this channel, you'll see that there are little forecasts for where your natal Saturn is. If you don't know where it is, go to astro.com or astroseek.com, put in your time, place, and date of birth, and find out where your natal Saturn is. This forecast there for you. So that will also help you piece together your Saturn story. Anyway, have a beautiful new Saturn ingress into the sign of Aries. I hope this has been helpful. If I can be of any help, just get in touch. All of my details are below. Loads of love. Bye for now. So if you're listening to this, you've probably got Saturn in the 10th house already. If you're somebody who has a Placidus chart in front of them, or you are somebody with Cancer rising and Saturn going into Aries is looking like it's going into your 10th house. So this is all about how Saturn in Aries is likely to function through this part of your chart right now. Now, Saturn, to put it into context, I want to kind of take you on that Saturn journey. Okay. So in recent times, he's been in the sign of Pisces and really activating the 9th house energy. The 9th house energy is a place of wonder, a place of adventure, a place of teaching, highbrow learning, exploring the world through, through a different perspective. Now, Saturn here will most likely have got you quite serious in spirituality or religion or politics, because wherever Saturn goes, he is pretty serious. But in the sign of Pisces, he was also breaking down anything that didn't really carry weight. And so anywhere where you might have had some fanciful ideas about spirituality or religion or politics, anywhere where your learnings and your ideas and your belief systems didn't carry weight, Saturn going through there would have really put them through some big examinations. Now, during that time, he would have been expanding on how you can learn more, be more, experience more, but just with a little bit more structure. And so as he comes into the 10th house, like he is right now, as he's in the 10th house, he's encouraging you to go even deeper and even stronger into your career, into how you stand in the world, which is one of the great things about the 10th house. It's showing us the legacy that we might be leaving the world or bringing forward in some way. And so this is a time, if you're using the Saturn in Aries energy here, this is a time when you're coming into a better form of leadership or management. It's also a time when you're likely to stand for something that you really believe in. One thing I would advise with this is Saturn can also show up as older, bossier, more authoritative characters. And so if you have had bullying issues or difficulties with a boss, you might find that as Saturn comes into the 10th house, initially it looks like there's even deeper problems there. But that's not necessarily so. Saturn here is asking you, like, where is your personal responsibility in all of this? He's really asking you and really testing you actually to become a much better shape of who you are in terms of how you are seen in the world. You see, the 10th house is highly, highly visible. This would be a terrible place to make a huge to put yourself out there in some way that is not completely founded on truth, trust, facts, experience, practicality, anywhere where you're rushing. And here's the tendency, with your 10th house and the sign of Aries working together, you have a tendency to move forwards with some passion. And any other planets that goes through this, it tends to activate the Aries energy, which is to act first and seek permission later. And yet Saturn coming through here is giving you a bit of a caution. Yes, it's good to stand strong. Yes, it's good to show where you are an authority in your own right. However, that Aries energy that pushes before it finds out what's really going on, that is the part of you that needs to maybe taken into consideration to avoid having issues with bosses or to avoid upsetting authority around you, which is also something that Saturn up here can absolutely bring about. So here are the sort of keywords I've put in: leadership, management, boss issues. I've already put that in. The need to lead in your life. Like, how is that expressing right now? You know, with Saturn coming into the top spot, you know, Saturn actually rules the 10th house, or the 10th sign of the zodiac, which is Capricorn. And the Capricornian idea of career, I would say, is they're very patient, you know, because they know at some point they will get to the top. They know if they head out in the right direction and that they take measured, slow, tiny little steps, but every single step is putting them in the right direction. They know that they will, it's an inevitability that you'll get to the top if you follow that particular path, you know, and it's a path that most of the star signs or sign energy, you know, most of the others, you know, don't have that longevity in mind. They don't have that feeling of, yeah, that is going to work and I'm going to be patient enough to allow this to happen. But with Saturn coming into the top of your charts, and he has been patiently working through this for about 21 years, roughly. He's been taking you on this journey. And in many respects, where you are right now is meant to be the pinnacle of a Saturn cycle. This is meant to be a time when you are rising up and being seen as somebody with authority. And so you might ask yourself, what do I patiently but single-mindedly need to do to get myself there? Remember, Aries is very, very single-minded. That energy is fiery, it's determined, it takes action, it doesn't mess around, doesn't pussyfoot around. It's also quite defensive energy. So you might find that you're coming into leadership by defining what you're leading, you know. So if you found in the past that you've just tried to expand and show that your career is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, actually what's happening is it's going wider and wider and wider and wider and less potent. You might find as Saturn, which is limited, you know, he's showing the limitations. If you think of Saturn, he has his rings around him. You might find that Saturn coming up here is showing where you define and become more potent. And Aries is very single-minded. It doesn't have a big array of things it's looking at. It's always looking in one focus to what you really are wanting and in, and then focus there, put all of your potency there, so that you're, I guess what it is, it's a leadership plan to do with discernment. It's like letting everything that's not like all the fluff bits, you can leave that because other people pick that up. You don't need to become well known or rise in authority by becoming somebody who has the fluff. You don't need that. You know, Aries in the 10th house is very fierce, and so yes, what I really see you're going through over the next 2 years up until when Saturn goes into the sign of Taurus is you're becoming more potent, more boundaried, but because of that, you're actually slowly but surely rising up. Now, this can also bring up parental themes because the 10th house and the 4th houses, these two houses are very much about parental archetypes. So, and there is some mixed messaging. Lots of different astrologers have slightly different beliefs. I tend to believe, and again, I always test this with the clients I'm working with, I tend to believe that the more home-based parent is more represented by the 4th house, and the more external or business-like parent, the one that maybe was out of the home more, the one that was the breadwinner, the one that was helping to show you what it might be like to stand in the world. I see that, you know, this is that particular parent. That might be your mum, it might be your dad. But when Saturn comes into the 10th house, you might also find that your parents or that specific parent seems to age a little bit. You know, where Saturn is going, he is aging things. He's aging the process. Everything is coming full circle. So if you've been on a journey of your career, it's going to come full circle around this time. But similarly, your parents, you know, if they've been working through that particular parent I'm talking about, your outward facing parent, they may well come full circle on something. They might suddenly feel like they're aging. Now, aging, has been quite maligned. I think in Western society, it's seen as, you're aging, you're getting less effective. But in some cultures, it's actually seen as a sign of wisdom. Like you're coming into a time where you're stronger, you're wiser, you see things from a completely different perspective. You might do things a bit with a little less speed, and a little bit more caution, a little bit more patience. And actually, there's some strength in that. So the aging effect is definitely on view. And yeah, Saturn, wherever he goes, he's testing us. So you might feel that as you're stepping forwards into your authority, as you're defining your output, as you're reaffirming your clear direction, which is very much an Aries thing, you might find that you get a little bit of a test, because we're always tested with Saturn. So it might show up as a rivalry. You might be tested just to see if your vision is strong and if you're really strong enough to carry that vision forwards. So don't be afraid to do that. This is a time to stand in your courage. Now, before I move on, I want to just also put into your mind where Saturn will be going after this particular period in time. So, wherever Saturn's going, he's taking about 2.5 years to go through one sign. So we know that this is quite a big part of the story, the story of your career. This is the time when you're knuckling down and getting a lot more potent and more direct. But where this is leading, it will be leading into a gradual opening out, where you might be in a position to collaborate, where you might be in a position to be more philanthropic. To me, it's a time when you reach so much either adulation, recognition, success in terms of your ambition. Maybe you meet what you were hoping to achieve. And so the next part of the story, which will be coming in the Saturn into Taurus times, that is very much about how you're expanding your expertise and your brilliance and your status, which is rising with Saturn in the 10th house, or most likely rising with Saturn in the 10th house. The next stage will be to collaborate with people, and then your influence can spread outwards. So don't, if you're worried that you're being asked to define your direction right now, and that's going to take you down a rabbit hole or keep you stuck in a position, within a couple of years, that is going to expand out, and it might be expanding through collaboration. Maybe there will be somebody that you collaborate with that has a similar product or energy to you, but you stand side by side each other. Maybe you both work with different modalities in the same industry, for instance. But this can really show that, once you've achieved that position, that you start to broaden again. So it's not keeping you in place. Also, something else, as Saturn comes naturally into the next part of the journey, you'll have more influence, and there's more things like funding avenues, the ability to work with really large organizations. So yeah, this is a very important step in the journey for Saturn in Aries. And let's not also forget that Neptune is also going here. You've also had Uranus opening the doors socially as well. And you've also got Pluto currently working through the 8th. So there's lots of different things taking place right now. To me, it looks like you're coming up here to achieve something quite spectacular. So I'm going to leave that there. I hope that's helpful for you. Now, if you would like to also know about your birth Saturn, like where was it natally, and you know what your birth chart looks like, let's say your birth Saturn was in the 4th house or the 6th house or the 1st house, whatever. I've got a playlist called Saturn Through the Houses. Take a look at that, and you can find the right episode, and it will tell you more about Saturn, your feelings of discernment and determination, your ability to plan and be practical throughout your whole birth chart. So yeah, hopefully that's going to be helpful to you. And if you do need any help or further support, then just check out my links below. Anyway, loads of love. Have a good one, and speak to you real soon. Lots of love. Bye for now. If you're listening to this forecast, it's because Saturn is just or has already been in the 9th house. Now, Saturn is changing signs from Pisces and going into the sign of Aries. That's happening today. He's been around that area for quite some time. He did actually go temporarily into Aries last year, in fact. But yes, he's now officially into the sign of Aries. And this forecast is for you if Saturn is currently in the ninth house. Now, Saturn, and if you are somebody who has a whole sign chart, you'll find that you also have Leo ascendant. So this is for a Leo ascendant whole sign charter, or for somebody with Saturn in the ninth house. Now, when Saturn comes into any sign, it's part of a much bigger journey. And I always like to explore the journey a little bit by understanding where he's just been, where he is right now, and where that will be moving you to, because then it really puts it into context. You know, it's all well and good for me to like share this vision here of the ninth house, which does include working on your belief systems, like your earning wisdom for sure, because Saturn always tests us wherever he goes. This can absolutely show a really big move on your current adventure. That's great. But what's really leading into it? And that's where I'm going to start this. So, you know, where Saturn has just been activating in the eighth house has been a place of where you might have felt more of the restrictions of Saturn. You know, he comes with those rings around him. And so anytime you get a bit too big for your boots, as some people might say, like the Saturn rings come in and you might feel a bit judged. You might feel a bit embarrassed or shamed. And in fact, the eighth house is definitely a place where we test ourselves. In fact, you know, it's a place of other people's values and how they impact you. So for instance, all of the blame, shame, guilt, and anger that you feel in your life is literally through relationships with other people, the comparisons, how people judge you, also how you judge them. And the eighth house brings up a lot of this, usually through the guise of ancestral family problems, your own childhood and where things haven't cleared. And I always think of the eighth house as being a place of secrets and secrets revealed, but it's also other people's money as well as their values. So the resources you've had to play with. So I think a lot of deservability comes into this, whether you're fitting the narrative that you grew up with or whether you're challenging it. And I think, you know, when Saturn comes into this part of the chart, either you feel very challenged by the family narrative or you do start to challenge it. You know, in many ways, the eighth house shows us where we cross a line, you know, where we go through a rite of passage to a new way of understanding our position in the world and also our position in the family. And so it's with this, having felt quite tested to the core, including, you know, whether you're worth it, whether you deserve things, whether you felt a lot of shame or embarrassment, you've had to deal with quite a few things. To me, this is where Saturn is now entering your ninth house. After feelings of restrictions and being held in place, now comes the freedom, now comes the opening out. And so the ninth house is associated with having a bit of a breather. That's nice. You know, it's about the long adventure. You know, this is a place where other people's cultures and customs come into our world. This is a place where we might travel, where we might take our evolution a lot more seriously. This is where we start to learn about belief systems. And it might also show where we're very religious or spiritual, or where we really get into sort of political methodologies. It's also a place of law. Hopefully there's no legal things going on from the eighth house and into the ninth, which they both kind of work with the legal energy, actually. So there could be something legal going on. But this is a place where, you know, you're rising above where you were and you're experiencing things with maybe a stronger belief system. So yeah, Saturn, wherever he goes, he's bringing an energy of seriousness and maturation into your world. So he's maturing you. If we're lucky, he's bringing in wisdom. He's helping you to become wise in yourself. You know, he is showing you an alternative perspective that you might not have been able to see before. And it might be because of age, and it might be because of experience. So in many respects, your need for freedom and space and individuality is now coming from a more wise perspective. And it might be a bit slower. It might not be as rushed as before, but there's something very special about it. Anywhere where you're now deciding to study and kind of knuckle down and really specialize in some information, that's likely to go really, really well, because Saturn really rewards people who put in the hard work. If you've been planning a big move, this definitely shows up in the charts of people who are moving from one country to another, or to a different part in their country. Maybe you're picking up like your home and moving somewhere. That absolutely shows up in the ninth house, because any kind of move actually is widening your perspective. And this is really what this house is about. So there's a lot going on here. And it's not as, it doesn't feel as critical as some of the other houses do, like the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th. They really move us and shift us along. Whereas the ninth house, it's shifting our perspective, and it might move us to a different part of the world, but not in a way that feels like life or death. This feels a lot more like, I'm moving because I'm expanding. I'm moving because it feels better. It doesn't feel like it's coming from necessity. It's coming from a place of you having agency in your own life. So I like this. I think this is quite helpful. And in many respects, it's going to strengthen your really strong and helpful and practical belief systems. Anywhere, however, where your belief systems haven't really carried weight, Saturn will give you a test. So it might show up in the form of other people coming up against your views, or you learning something contrary to what you initially believed, which could be quite shocking. So yeah, this is a couple of years of expanding, but with stability, which I think can be a really important part of the journey. Now, where is this heading? Well, this will be heading from 2028, when Saturn goes into the sign of Taurus. It's going to be hitting the 10th house part of your chart, which is about your career, your status in life. It's about how far up you're rising. It's also about you taking on more responsibility. It's about you coming into your own authority. So in many respects, over the next couple of years, what you might find helpful is to explore, to learn, to go as deep as you want, knowing that Saturn is going to create a lot more gravitas for you. As you come through this, when you come through the other side and it's hitting into your career part of your chart, you'll be much more learned in your responses. Your arguments, your belief systems, they'll carry so much more weight and gravitas. You'll have a much, I think, stronger appreciation of how deep and broad life really is. It's opening your mind, but not with this kind of sort of fantastical energy. It's opening your mind with like a serious inquiry. So as it comes into the 10th house, which it will do eventually, it will, I think, be standing you in really good stead, because you know the full scope of your career, because you've widened your perspective for a while and considered things much more deeply. So I hope that's helpful to you in understanding that for your birth chart. Now, it's all well and good to understand where Saturn is right now. I also think that understanding where Saturn was at the time of your birth is also very helpful, because if your Saturn was in quite a strong place, the chances are this particular aspect, with Saturn going through your ninth, will be felt a lot more strongly. I think planets speak much louder when they're in a strong place in our birth chart. So if you want to explore how Saturn works in your birth chart, I've got a playlist called Saturn Through the Houses. Literally all you need to do is find where it is, which house it was in natally, and then go and listen to it. So hopefully that's of use as well. Now, if you are wanting a little bit more help or advice, I've got my free community on School. That's skool.com. Feel free to come and join us there. Or if you want to work with me privately, all you need to do is just get in touch. All of my details are below in the show notes. So anyway, have a great one. Hopefully you'll be welcoming Saturn into the sign of Aries in your ninth house with a feeling of anticipation. I think it's going to be a good one. Anyway, loads of love, have fun, and catch you next time. Bye for now. So if you're listening to this Saturn will have gone into Aries and it will be in your 8th house. Now, if you look at your charts using a whole sign perspective, you'll also definitely have your ascendant in the sign of Virgo. If you prefer Placidus charting, you might find that your ascendant is in the sign of Leo, and you've got Virgo in the 1st house. However that is occurring for you, what is uniting you here is the fact that Saturn is in Aries in your 8th house. And that's what I'm going to be talking about right now. Now, I always think with Saturn, because he's such a long and slow moving planet, it takes him 29 and a bit years to go all the way around the zodiac, so he is really giving you a long-term story. This isn't a sort of quick fix kind of planetary forecast. He's going to be in the sign of Aries for the next 2.5 years, taking you midway through 2028. And so I always think that his story, which is one of discernment and practical application and determination, and in the sign of Aries, it's about sort of taking action and leading, and being quite fierce and protecting your boundaries. So, I think Saturn at this point in your journey is going to be really bringing up some big stuff for you. As this goes, I always think where he's just been is also telling you the soil that he is coming into Aries with. Have you prepared the soil well? So I'm going to start by actually giving a quick synopsis of what you've been learning with him in the sign of Pisces, and how that relates to him now moving into Aries. And then at the end of this, I'm going to be also sowing the seeds for what will be coming in the next 2 years as he moves into the sign of Taurus. The relevance of that being, if you can understand the overall context of the Saturn journey through your houses and through the signs, to me, that's going to really put this into the best context you can have. And that's my whole aim here, is to make this practical and useful, which is a very Saturn thing. So in the recent past, Saturn's been in the sign of Pisces, and predominantly in your 7th house. Saturn going through the 7th house can make us really serious about our relationships. It can also be a time when we experience some disappointment in our relationships. Maybe it just feels a bit harder. It sometimes shows up with our partners being a bit depressed, or a little bit surly, a little bit grumpy, a little bit judgmental. And you might find actually that you're just finding a lot of people kind of in a sort of discontent, which often happens when you've got something like Saturn going through your 7th house. And in the sign of Pisces as well, Saturn in the sign of Pisces, Saturn's not very happy in the sign of Pisces, because he's uncertain of what's going on. Pisces is quite wishy-washy and anything goes. It's very creative, very soulful. And of course, Saturn talks in very different terms. Saturn is quite boundaried. He's got those rings. He's also trying to limit things rather than make them big and amorphous, which the sign of Pisces naturally does. And so you might have found in recent times that you've been trying to put relationships into a box a little bit more, or understand them, try to take the uncertainty of relationships, because they're so vast and can include so much, but to bring it all into a way that's more manageable, that feels more respectful. So I think where he's just been, you've been learning a lot about what you would like in your relationships, what would feel more respectful for you, and also how much of other people's grumpiness you're prepared to take. And so now he's coming into, and also what you'll do to solidify a relationship. I also want to say, Saturn coming into the 7th can also show where we commit to somebody, put a ring on it. He has his rings. He likes to create shape and form. So that can also work in your favor. But now he's coming into the 8th, and the 8th house is where relationships go deeper. Now, by deeper, it doesn't necessarily transfer or confer that they get easier. I find the 8th house is a place of other people's values. So like when you meet people, you can be in a honeymoon period for quite a while, can't you? But then eventually you'll rub up against each other's values, and they'll rub up against yours. So maybe you've got some values based on your childhood and some of your childhood experiences just like they do, and they might not always be compatible. The things that trigger you might not trigger them, and then comes the judgment of each other. Now, similarly, the 8th house also shows not just each other's values, but also each other's resources that they're playing with. And so Saturn coming through here can really sometimes show when the subject of how you share things between you and your partner, between you and your birth family, between you and your ancestors, it can really come up. Deservability comes up. Blame, shame, guilt, anger, any unspoken but very felt emotions can absolutely erupt during this time. And remember, it's not just Saturn, this red thing here. You've also got Neptune coming in. You know, Neptune's already in the sign of Aries in your 8th house. And so both of these together is likely to bring up quite a bit of a storm. But what is this storm for? What's it trying to do? Well, from the Saturn perspective, I think you're really wanting to understand what to take seriously and what not. So, for instance, anywhere where your ancestral pains and triggers have been going on for a really long time, with Saturn coming into the 8th, you might say, enough of this. This is what I stand for now, and I'm drawing this line, and that's what I'm going to maintain. So it can show where you're really bound, putting in a strong boundary and saying, I'm not going to go there anymore. You're not going to take me into the shame. You're not going to take me into the blame or the embarrassment or the guilt. Guilt's another sort of 8th house emotion for sure. So yeah, I do see the putting up of boundaries, but remember, it's in the sign of Aries. You've got Aries here. Now, Aries takes a very fiery approach to anyone that is not being respectful. And as Saturn in Aries comes in, this could absolutely ignite the warrior in you that is absolutely creating a very strong boundary, maybe even cutting people off. I mean, one big test, I mean, according to how old you are, is to go back 30 years, go back to 1996, the last time that Saturn was in this part of your chart. What were you doing? What was coming up for you? Did you lay down the law? Did you separate a little bit from people who you found difficult? Saturn can show where we really apply ourselves and we take a very moderate, practical, determined approach to unpick things that seem almost impossible. It can give us the patience and determination to do that. However, with the sign of Aries there as well, Aries can sometimes move so fast that you kind of storm in there and say, no, I'm not going to work with this, not going to work with that, blah, blah, blah. You're wrong. So Aries is kind of taking action. Saturn in Aries is taking action, but maybe not thinking about the consequences straight away. So I do think part of this journey with Saturn right now is to learn that even when you're fired up and raring to go, you still need to just double check that everything is right or correct before you commit to something. Because in this area, Saturn in Aries could really do you some harm, because you might rush in and say, this is exactly how it is, and then later have to retract that. So I do think getting very clear about things is important, and maybe just taking a step back, not rushing quite so fast, because the 8th house is quite a secretive and private house where lots of things can languish for a long time, lots of attitudes. This is shared attitudes, shared family culture. It's very difficult to change an established family culture. So the growth here could be really, really incredible. Absolutely incredible. If you were to take more of a Saturnian approach as opposed to the Aries approach, the Saturn approach is to maybe not have high expectations. Saturn can really burst the bubble on high expectations. So, you might be resetting your expectations to a level that might feel a little bit depressive, but it might just be you being practical. So you might say, okay, I want this to settle and that we can have an understanding of how it's settled. In the past, you might have thought, I want this to settle and we're all friends and we all get on and blah, blah, blah. And so you might just take things back a little bit and maybe change your expectations, reset them slightly, because you can always amend them, but it's really hard to feel that level of disappointment when you're hoping for something really amazing and it doesn't quite add up to there. This is a place where we can get really quite distorted with disappointment. Hence why, I advise that, you might sort of scale back your expectations a little bit. So this is about managing your expectations and managing the expectations of each other. If you're expecting people to behave in a certain way and then they're clearly not able to do that, to continually expect them to, and then make the judgment that must mean this, and this, because they're not meeting my expectation. Can you see where I'm going here? This to me is such these are sort of treacherous places to have Saturn go to. And it happens to all of us, in the course of a 30-year cycle. However, this is really clarifying things, and the tension that you may have felt building over the last couple of years in terms of how you can have improved relationships. This is the outcome. It's getting you to go even deeper. See, one of the flip sides of the 8th house is when we manage it really well, we come into a much greater trust of each other, where all of a sudden our levels of trust are so much higher than they would have ever been. This is a place where if you are doing the work and you're being very persistent, discerning, calm, not taking things personally, like Saturn's maturity here, like Saturn is an old planet, he is a bit of an old fart. And so by taking a slightly slower, more discerning, more plodding kind of energy here, you could absolutely make some really huge transformations, much for the better. So overall then, this is about mastering the next step, the next step in your relationships. And also if there's a next step in life that you're wanting to take and you've not been able to take that next step, is it setting up a business? Is it like moving to a different part of the world? Whatever that next step is, Saturn here can really help you, especially if that next step is being held back because of family attitudes or something that's not quite healed. So this is about mastery of the next step, going through a rite of passage of something, like if this is happening whilst you're going through menopause or puberty or going through a divorce, or, these are, or like, your children are just about to leave home. This is a huge time. All of these rites of passage are really important. Dealing with ancestral values I've mentioned, and attitudes. This is also a place of survival, and Aries is absolutely about survival. And this is also about taking responsibility for trusting each other. So, one thing I haven't mentioned is you might take responsibility for not just how you're feeling in something. You might actually, even when you're dealing with people that might be really difficult, that you might not like, that might have hurt you in the past, the sort of taking responsibility energy here is immense. It's like, how can I set up the conversations here? How can I set up the experience here so that everybody is looked after really, really well? So to me, I just feel like you've got the biggest shoulders in the world right now, and it might feel like you're carrying the world on it. But what you're doing is building trust within your family scope. You're building trust in such a strong way that after this, you are coming into some much freer times. The next move from 2028, as Saturn goes into the sign of Taurus, is you're able to expand with a much greater sense of resources. You're able to expand. It's a lot more open-minded. You feel a lot freer. So to me, this is a necessary pit stop on the journey of life. And it is so that you have the stronger relationships. And so that when you are expanding in this next period, you've got really good people kind of cheering you on from the side. So I hope that's helpful. It's not really seen as like the 8th house area is one of those parts of the chart that a lot of people fear having these slow moving planets going through, because it seems to take so long and it's such a private and difficult territory to navigate. So, if you have been a bit worried about this, I can see why your fears aren't imagined. I always think when you're dealing with Saturn, especially through something like the eighth house, that it's important to understand where Saturn is in your birth chart as well. Like, where is it natally? Because where it is natally, if it's really, really strong, you'll notice that this Saturn in your eighth house is likely to feel like a big deal. And if you want to know about Saturn through your natal houses, I've actually got a playlist called Saturn Through the Houses. If you check that out, look for your one. Funnily enough, my Saturn is actually in the eighth house already. So maybe that's why I went on about it a little bit. But anyway, if I can be of any help at all to support, then just get in touch. All my details are below. I do some readings for clients from time to time. I also have a community that's free to join. It's called Feel Good Astrology, and it's on the school platform. That's skool.com, where there's so many more resources that can also help you with this next stage that you're just about to go into. So much love to you. Have a good one, and catch up with you real soon. Bye for now. So this is the forecast then for Saturn in Aries in the 7th house. And according to how you have your chart created, if it's in whole sign, you'll have Libra rising, absolutely. If you've got a Placidus birth chart, you might find that you've got your ascendant in the sign of Virgo, maybe Libra. But this is this is to talk about the energy of Saturn in Aries in the 7th house. Now, with each of these forecasts, I'm trying to put it into context, because Saturn is such a slow moving planet. It takes 29.7 years to go all the way around the zodiac. And of course, it describes a story of responsibility, a story of mastery, and a story of where we use discernment and what happens actually when we don't use it, and how Saturn's a bit of a hard taskmaster, in fact. Now, it just so happens that the 7th house is one of the angular houses, the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th. These are all very critical houses because they're all governing important parts of our life. And this is the house of partnerships. And so I want to put this into context a little bit about what you've recently been learning with Saturn going through the sign of Aries. Saturn going through the sign of Pisces. So you can fully understand how Saturn is going to be taking that energy and transforming it in the sign of Aries in your 7th house, and then sort of add in where this is going in 2 years' time as Saturn moves into Taurus. So really what I want to do is talk about Saturn in Aries in the 7th house as part of an ongoing story, not just it in the 7th house as a one-off thing. So here goes. First of all, what have you been learning recently? So Saturn in the sign of Pisces. Saturn doesn't express himself very eloquently in the sign of Pisces, because he's trying to hold everything together. And, the energy of Pisces can be quite scattered, quite emotional, quite varied and changeable. And, in the 6th house, which is very much to do with the day-to-day running of our life, and also very much about our energy levels, our physical energy levels. I imagine that over the last couple of years, you've had some pretty tough lessons in managing your energy, in pulling things back in. When Saturn comes through the 6th house, we have to really focus on what we really need to do and let all the additional stuff just fall by the wayside. And where we try and take too much on, and where we refuse to use discernment, it can get quite messy. Now, Pisces in the 6th house, I think is quite people pleasing. And of course, if you do really identify with the Libra rising, and funnily enough, the Virgo rising, which is very much about being of service with others, it's very difficult to limit things in the 6th house, as Saturn has been requiring. So the chances are you've been learning some very tough lessons about people pleasing and doing a little bit too much for others and trying to scale it back. But that's where we are right now, that you've learned some things. You've probably lost a bit of energy along the way and have had to use discipline to regain your balance. Now, as we are coming into Saturn in the sign of Aries in the 7th house, you've actually cleared some space for relationships to come in if you're single, for relationships to deepen if you're already in a relationship, and possibly, some space so that you can take your relationships a lot more seriously. So in effect, Saturn in the 6th house has helped you to get your life back on track, to help your life shape. It's, it feels like it's got a bit more of a shape and a bit more space created so that you can start to take your relationship seriously. And that is really where we are right now. Now, Saturn in the sign of Aries is also leadership. Like Saturn, is an authority in his own right, and he can be quite bossy wherever he goes. But Saturn can also show up as a person in your life, in particular, an authoritative person in your life. So, one of the things that I've noticed, and actually have noticed in my life, is when Saturn has come over the 7th house, how it brings in people who are very, very serious, people who mean business, people who maybe are very deeply practical and deeply conservative and deeply sometimes trying to limit you a little bit, the Saturn energy, which is trying to keep things smaller, keep things contained, keep things in shape. So you might find, on the one hand, that you start attracting people who are very businesslike, who are very serious, who want to know answers, want to measure things, want to potentially control you if it feels like your life is a little bit out of hand. So for instance, if you're already in a relationship, you might find that your partner becomes a bit more Saturnian. And so, they might be asking you some difficult questions about, work and stuff like that. In fact, I've been one of those Saturnian partners. So my husband has had Saturn going through his 7th house. And funnily enough, during that time, I did appear really serious in his life. I was really asking like tough questions like, like, how much work are you doing and blah, 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 so, the Saturn person in your life can sometimes feel a little bit like they're trying to keep tabs on you a little bit, because Saturn can be quite judgmental. But similarly, Saturn can show up in the 7th house as wanting to get more serious in the commitment, so Saturn is saying, where you're serious about a relationship, you can absolutely take it to the next level. So there is this energy that your relationship can go deeper and into more of a formal relationship. So, it can correlate with people getting engaged and getting married, for instance, or meeting somebody who is really serious about you, because Saturn brings in the seriousness. So that's all great. Now, for instance, if I have noticed in my own career, for instance, that the slower moving planets going through the 7th house also show the kinds of clients that I might get. So for instance, if you're working for yourself, or, if you've got your own business, you might find that you're suddenly about to attract a lot of older, authoritative business type clients who are very, very serious about themselves. So according to what you work in, that could also, this information about Saturn coming into the 7th could also really help you plan who to expect to come into your life. So that's just a few of the headlines. But you might also be starting to wonder about boundaries in your life and whether you need them with the people around you. You might be requiring, your partner and your friends to behave in a more respectful way. So, there's a lot about boundaries here, because Aries, first of all, Aries as a sign is quite defensive, and he like the sign of Aries, which is masculine. So yeah, he is a he. But the sign of Aries will say, this is me, this is my place. And, he will put up boundaries. It's ruled by Mars. And so, the Aries energy will fight for what they want. And so Saturn coming in here really describes boundaries. You might find that your partners are really boundarying boundarying your relationship and, getting other people to stay away. So you might feel like your Saturn partner is kind of narrowing the scope for other people to reach into your life. So it's going to be interesting. This is absolutely testing the strength and the shape of your relationships. Now, this can be very testing in conflict, because the first house is very much about you and the seventh is about your partners. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, with the Aries energy in the seventh house, it can bring people into your life who aren't as people pleasing as you, who aren't as easygoing, who are a little bit more territorial, and also very, very single-minded. And so you may well, as Saturn comes into the area that rules them, you might find that they're giving you a little bit more conflict. They're if anything, I see it as you're unraveling a new way of relating to each other so that you can know where your shape begins in your relationship and kind of know where it ends. Now, Saturn is quite an older planet, so it's really normal to attract older people in. And something about Saturn also that I'd like to share is that Saturn really reveres security. Saturn wants things to be respectful. He loves security. He loves a gradual incline. Like he's always working, like the Saturn motif is a little and often. You can grow things. So to me, if you're in a already strong relationship and you've already gone through, like you've already experienced how to boundary your relationship, and where it starts and where it ends, and you've learned how to manage conflict together. What you might find really helpful with this Saturn in seventh house energy is that you can plan something together, plan something that you can single-mindedly together. Isn't that funny that you can be single-minded and together, but you can work doggedly towards something. So this can absolutely show up as something where, like a partnership goal, where you are connecting and committing to something together and working slowly but surely and steadily towards it. This can be a very, very powerful time. Ultimately, it's asking you to have courage to relate to each other. So that's going to bring up a need for a lot of openness and honesty, which, funnily enough, is not necessarily something that Saturn really talks about. Saturn might want you to be accountable, but openness and transparency doesn't normally come up in the Saturnian dictionary. And similarly, Aries is much more, we act first and seek forgiveness later. Aries are in such a rush usually to do stuff that they're interested in, and they're single-minded and they don't want anyone else hanging around. But with Saturn here, you might find actually that your partners are actually wanting to do things with you, and they are needing to slow down a little bit. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more courage to relate to each other. There's going to be more time to spend together. And I think something much deeper can develop. So yeah, I think this can be a really, really great time. One thing that comes up with Saturn, and this is something that if you were to do a quick search on the internet, Saturn in my seventh house, what's happening? You might find that there's talk about separations and things like that. Now, while Saturn is a bonding planet, he puts rings around things. If your relationship isn't going to go the distance, if your relationship isn't naturally building slowly but surely towards something, Saturn here is also like the grim reaper. Saturn calls time on things. And so to me, this is showing up that if you're in the wrong relationship with the wrong person and you suspect it, or you already know it, or maybe you don't yet know it, but you're going to find out, like Saturn is here to help you kind of test how strong your relationship is. And any relationship that can go through Saturn going through your seventh house is a relationship that's going to stand the test of time, because, Saturn is going to help you see your partner without all of the tinted glasses. This will be a time when you really see, I don't want to say the worst in your partner, but you'll be maybe tired out by your partner and think, oh my God, now what? Which I think is actually what my husband was thinking about me not so long ago when Saturn was going through his 7th house. So yeah, it can feel a little bit tiring, like your partner is demanding, they're asking a lot more. But really what's happening is you're finding out if this is something that's long term. Saturn is a planet of longevity, and if you are really meant to be together, you'll go through this time and you'll get deeper into your relationship. But anything that's not going to stand the test of time, this can be a time when things start to fall away. And Saturn helps you come into discernment about what's right for you and absolutely what's not right for you. And during that time, you might actually start making some decisions and think, you know what, my energies will be much better spent on myself. And then I'll be fresher to go into a new relationship with all of my energies intact. So this is definitely a time of testing yourself in conflict. It's definitely having the courage to relate to somebody. But it's also about boundaries and the needs for them, and the needs to, take action where necessary, and also commit where necessary too. So I hope that's helpful. Now, going deeper, like where this is leading, the 8th house is, I think, quite a mysterious house, and it gets a lot of, it's often anecdotally spoken about as being a place of death and taxes and sex. But ultimately, I think of it as a place of shared resources and also shared values and expectations, the values that we might put on each other. So judgments, so shame, blame, guilt, anger all come up here. Essentially, I think the 8th house is asking us to go into trust. A lot of that comes up in the 7th house, but the 8th house takes it deeper. And, with the stability that you can create in the 7th house, by the time we get to the 8th house, because you feel more secure, you might even go deeper into your unconditional, your unconscious programs, your programs about relationships, the psychological triggers and things like that. So where this Saturn currently is in the sign of Aries in your 7th house, ultimately that will pass away to making you work even deeper on trust, and to unpick the things that maybe stop you from going deeper in relationships at a psychological level. And if there's any sort of issues in the greater family that you both sit in, they're likely to come up. So to me, the more you can do to relate to each other and to have the courage to face your partner with honesty and without the rose tinted glasses on, like really taking each other seriously, it's setting the scene for some real deep inner child work in a couple of years' time. And again, that could sound really difficult, but actually it's very liberating. It's helping you see what's held you back. It's a much deeper medicine. It really is a Saturn medicine for sure. So anyway, there's a lot going on here, and I don't want to overburden you. And I always think that when we're talking about Saturn, it's also important to see what your Saturn coding is in your birth chart. So, might I suggest, if you know where Saturn is in your birth chart natally, check it out. I've got a playlist called Saturn Through the Houses. If you go there, look it up. It's 15 minutes, I think. And it will talk about your birth placement of Saturn and what you can do with it. And that, with Saturn's current position, I think will give you a real good sense of what you're learning, what you're being tested on, and what you might achieve when you come out the other end. So wishing you loads of love as Saturn moves into your 7th house. And if I can be of any help, then just get in touch. All of my details are below in the show notes. Bye for now. Okay, so if you're listening to this forecast, it's because you've got Saturn in the sign of Aries right now. He's going into the sign of Aries and he's in the 6th house. Now, that might be if you've got there's lots of different ways we can draw up a birth chart. And I know some people that watch my channel have a whole sign birth chart and some have a Placidus. What that means is if you've got a whole sign forecast, a whole sign chart, you've got Scorpio in your first house. If you've got Placidus, you might have Libra and Scorpio in your first house. But irrespective of that, if Saturn in Aries is in your sixth house right now, this is the forecast for you. So what I'm going to do is just talk about Saturn in Aries, but I want to put the context in. He is a planet that goes around the whole zodiac in 29.7 years. So what has he just been working on is really going to help you understand where he is right now, and what gifts you've already just recently got that are going to help you with what you're doing. And I'm also going to focus why you're getting it right this time, because where is he moving after this? So he's going to be here for the next 2.5 years, and then he's going to be going into your seventh house. So this is quite an important time for you with Saturn in the sixth. So let's just start at the beginning with a little recap of Saturn and what he's meant in the sign of Pisces for you, because Saturn in the sign of Pisces is always trying to make things make sense. Like if you've got Pisces in your fifth house, which is deeply creative, very romantic, and has a lot of passion, but it's quite difficult to hold your passion in place. Most likely Saturn going through your fifth has created some structural issues, created some boundaries. Maybe the things that you're passionate about, you might have a hobby, you might have children that you're obviously passionate about, and they are people that you've created. You might have a passionate relationship. The fifth house also looks at sex and sensuality and intimacy. But the fifth house is a place where we're passionate and where our passion can spill out into life. And so what you've been learning recently is how to contain it a little bit better. Saturn has probably given you some persistence to help you master your creative tendencies, but you've probably needed to focus on them a little bit so that they don't overwhelm your life. Now that Saturn comes into your sixth house, you're going through a much deeper clear out in how you manage your life. And it is worth paying some attention to it, because what I notice is when we've got slow moving planets going through our sixth house, it can really turn our life upside down and require us to have extra patience to get things sorted. I also want to premise the fact that Chiron is still just in your sixth house, and he will be moving out of here later on this year. But having Chiron go through your sixth house has probably brought some disruption to the smooth flow of how things work. So the sixth house is about your day-to-day running of your life, like how you go to work, your daily routine, how you manage your pets as well as your life, how you manage your house, how you pay your bills, all of the regularity in the habits. But this really also spills over into physical well-being, because, do you have fitness as a daily part of your life? How do you eat food? Like, how do you prepare your food? Are you preparing food that's going to help you have sustained energy throughout your whole schedule? And yeah, what your physical health like? So I really see that the sixth house is like the office manager of your chart, and where it gets stressed out or emotional or triggered, and Chiron going through there can really bring out illnesses, where we've got an imbalance, where we give, but don't receive. We often burn out, and having Chiron going through the sixth can be quite traumatic to experience burnout. Hopefully that hasn't happened to you. But the sixth house is a place of burnout for sure. And so Saturn coming in here is really asking you to learn to keep things in proportion and to organize your life in such a way that you're getting rid of the things that you absolutely don't need to carry. So this is the ultimate in minimalism. This is how can you minimalize your life as much as possible so that you are managing everything beautifully. So you're not just kind of hanging in there, like a fairground roundabout, one of those like fast spinning things, and you're like holding on for dear life as it's going around. If your life's like that, then as Saturn comes into the sixth house, It's like hold on to your hats you're gripping on. It's like a white knuckle ride. Saturn coming into your 6th house is about to get it all back into gear. One of the benefits of this is the passions that you've newly formulated and got a grip on. You're actually creating more of a space for them in your life, so to me it feels like you're really clear about what really matters, and now you're making more of a space for it. To me that makes perfect sense. It's also a time when, if you have had a long-term health illness or concern, or if you've been running on empty for many years, this is a time when you absolutely need to get a lot more regular about your life so that you can start to repair it. Because when Saturn comes through the 6th house, and a bit like in the Saturn in the 4th, I mean, I've just had him in the 4th. Can't wait for him to go into the 5th, honestly. If you're running on empty in the 4th or the 6th house, when Saturn comes in, you're starting from a completely depleted energy. And Saturn is not a planet that's adding things in. Saturn is kind of taking things away. So yeah, you want to get out of a depleted mindset and a depleted body as quickly as possible. And Saturn is here to teach you. He might kick your ass while he's doing it, but he is here to teach you to start being moderate in your body, to being respectful in your body, to putting yourself first, to putting boundaries in place to make sure you are creating time for your body work. Internally as well, you might want to get your structure really beautifully aligned, make sure all your muscles and everything are all perfectly aligned. So there's not one part of your body that is taking more of the stress than the rest. So yeah, it really fits in with this, like working hard, burnout, need for discernment and responsibility with all threads of work. Now, this is a time when we're also often called to be responsible for other people on a day-to-day basis. Now, in the 10th house, Saturn can absolutely bring in responsibility for other people in terms of an organizational sense. You might be suddenly promoted and you're responsible for more people. But in the 6th house, you might be responsible for more things every day, every minute of every day. Now, that can also correlate. Saturn in the 5th can also show where we become a mom or a dad. So we might have young children. We might have new people in our family that we are having to keep tabs on and keep them safe and well. So again, the 6th house, Saturn is bringing more responsibilities, possibly more than you're ready for, and something's going to give, and it's going to be asking you how you're going to do that. So yes, definitely a need for discernment with all the threads. Which ones are you going to hold on to? Which ones are you going to cut out and minimalize? So this is working at health, working at money, persistence, minimalism. This is a time to have control. Now, if you're one of those signs that you don't like to be controlled, this is going to be a really strong learning opportunity for you. And, I don't know how old you are, but if you're old enough to remember the last time Saturn came through your 6th house, which would have been 30 years ago, that might also give you a clue of what you were learning then. This is a time of sustained effort, and it's not a glamorous position. However, I also want to put it to you that during this time of Saturn going through here, you're clearing your life out. You're making your life flow so much more effectively. You're making your body work more effectively. You're increasing your health. You're increasing your wealth. You're really starting to manage things in a beautiful way. And if you enjoy this, it makes the next flow into your 7th house so much easier. Like when we come to the 7th house, this is a time for relationship stability. And of course, it's really hard to get stable in a relationship if your life is a mess. So to me, this is the invitation, especially if you're single and you might not be ready for somebody, but you might be thinking, in the next couple of years, I'm going to be ready for that relationship, and think, okay, I'll deal with that then. My advice is deal with it now. Treat yourself with the beauty of don't think, oh, I don't matter enough right now, because it's going to matter when I actually do want a relationship. now is the time to invest in yourself. And now is the time to put you and your life first. So I hope that's helpful. I really, truly hope it's helpful. Now, I always think with Saturn, it's worthwhile understanding where Saturn is in our birth chart as well. If you understand where Saturn is in your birth chart, it also tells you a lot about your own attitudes to longevity, working towards something, your own levels of determination and persistence. And so it will help you know if this is really kind of adding onto your early natal Saturn theme, or if it's working in a completely different way. It helps you manage that energy much more effectively, I think. If you're interested in knowing more about your natal Saturn, then might I suggest that you check out my Saturn Through the Houses playlist. I created it about 4 or 5 years ago, but I still get comments on it all the time. It's absolutely worth listening to if you want to explore your natal Saturn. And if you need any more support beyond that, then consider joining my free community on the school platform. It's www.school.com/feelgoodastrology, or even booking in to have a consultation with me. However you're going through this, there's some level of support there for you. So anyway, have a beautiful ingress into the sign of Saturn, into the sign of Aries, and hopefully we'll catch up real soon. Lots of love. Bye for now. So if you're listening to this forecast, that's because you've got Saturn in the sign of Aries in your 5th house. Now, that can arise in many different ways. For instance, if you've got a whole sign chart that you look at, in whole sign, you'll have Sagittarius 1st house. And that would mean Saturn is literally just gone into the sign of Aries in your 5th house. Alternatively, if you prefer looking at your chart in a Placidus charting method, you might have Scorpio rising and Sagittarius in your 1st house, like I do, in fact, which is pushing Saturn into your 5th house in the sign of Aries. So this is going to hopefully help you sort of explore what it feels like to have Saturn in the 5th house, but also what it's like to have Aries in the 5th house as well, actually. Because Saturn's such a slow moving planet, taking 29.7 years to go all the way around the zodiac, I also think it's important to talk about the whole Saturn cycle, because it's a story of responsibility. It's a story of how we grow, how we become a lot more wise. It's a story of discernment. And, the 5th house is a place of creation. So it's a place where we might have children, where our children show up. It's also a place of fertility, a place of passion and intimacy with new partners. It's also a place where our hobbies can really come forwards. If you're somebody who, like if you're a creator of some sort, that will absolutely be captured in your 5th house as well. The whole energy is of what you're producing, what's coming from you, what's coming from your pelvic area, your womb area, your solar plexus, for instance. This is a really fertile place. And the whole idea of fertility, I think, is that things are growing. And of course, Saturn is not an energy of growing. Saturn is an energy of very slow, controlled, measured growth. But Saturn's also a planet of limitations. He's got the old bands around him. He's got his rings. And so how does that energy move in the 5th house that really wants to be sort of playful and joyous and passionate? So yeah, there's a few things to explore there. Now, interestingly, Saturn has just been in the 4th house, or in the sign of Pisces. And in the sign of Pisces, Saturn has tried to put a lid on it, trying to contain the emotions, trying to contain the spirit, trying to contain everything, all the matters of the home and family. And often when Saturn goes through the 4th house, which he just has done with you and me, Saturn brings up some tightnesses, so I don't suppose I'm on my own to say that over the last couple of years, since Saturn has been going through my 4th house, we've had to pull our belts in a little bit. Money might not have seemed to come in as easily as ever. To feel grounded at home has felt a little harder. And because it's the lowest part of our birth chart, we often feel a little bit sick or tired in ourselves. Saturn is really kind of reducing everything. And because he's such an elderly energy, such a grown up, older energy that he carries with him, that sort of Saturn energy, we start to feel a bit older, we start to feel a bit tired, we often get ill. I remember 30 years ago, which was the last time Saturn was going through that part of my chart, actually having a very serious illness. So it can absolutely bring that kind of energy in. And so in many ways, it's now time for us to, since we've been since he's given us a workout to get our home and family life right, and to make the right decisions for our home and family, and to also make the right decisions by our home and family when we might have reduced energy and reduced resources. It's really got us to firm things up a little bit to get things in proportion. And of course, after that, what we really want to do after getting really grounded is to express ourselves more, and to become a little bit more passionate, and to explore the things that lift us up. So this is how we can come back into our passion, but with a sense of serenity, and with a sense of measurement, with a sense of discipline, and also tons and tons of responsibility for our creations. So, if you are a parent already, and if you've got children, this might bring in a period of time, a couple of years, where you're taking a lot more responsibility for your children, where you're a lot more in touch with what's going on for them, where you're really helping them with their passions, and really helping them to grow stronger, to not have things quite so far out, So to me, it's like bringing them back into the fold a little bit, or helping them to become responsible or practical beings, So this is giving structure to your children. If you're wanting to create a family, this is a time when you'll be possibly tested to get into the energy of creation. And maybe to change some habits, or to make some adaptations to be able to bring that fertility in. Saturn actually does create shape and form. Without Saturn, we wouldn't have, like Saturn was the first planet really to cut us away from the heavens, and to create this physical reality, in mythology. So, he is here to help us have physical shape, and to birth a new generation. So it is absolutely possible, although, I have heard anecdotally, and I do know that people sometimes find it a little bit difficult to conceive around this time, but it's not impossible. That's the thing. I think where we're working with Saturn, and working with the energy of discipline, measurement, discernment, then the very best in Saturn support comes out in your fifth house, in that way of being creative. So however you're wanting to create, whether you're wanting to create a child, a family, whether you're wanting to support your children, whether you're wanting to support your own creativity and your own sensuality, the more you apply yourself slowly, consistently, and practically, the more Saturn's going to work with you. I always think with Saturn, you have to work with him. And if you don't, you get a real kind of Saturn slap around the face. So if you're just kind of like barreling into your creativity in a sort of haphazard style, most likely Saturn, you'll get a limitation that comes up, and that's Saturn showing that it's not going to work that way. You're meant to be succeeding in a Saturnian way in this area for the next couple of years. So what can you do? Let's talk about this a bit more. So like the fifth house is often associated with lovemaking, in particular new relationships, and that energy of like the freedom of sensuality. And so here he could actually help you find a serious new person to create with and connect with sensuously. This could be a time when you really apply yourself to all sensuous matters. This might be a time, in fact, when you learn something like massage, because to understand the body is quite structural. And of course, Saturn loves structure, and you need discipline, and it would be something that you'd practice and apply. So, techniques and things like that could really help sensuously. Now, the fifth house is also about self-expression, like how free are you to be yourself? So this is also a time when, if you're feeling fearful of expressing yourself, and Saturn can sometimes bring up our fears a little bit, this is a time to conquer those fears. This is a time when you can learn to express yourself in actually with a much more consistent output. So if you, like the thing with Saturn is he's not really a deeply romantic character. If we were all to pick a favorite planet and what that favorite planet gives us, most likely not many people are going to pick Saturn, because he's a bit of a buzzkill. He's always like toughening you up, wagging his finger and judging you. And yet he is the planet that is actually there to help you succeed. He's the one that's going to give you the harder lessons, give you a bit of a talking to, so that you really apply yourself. And then all of a sudden your brilliance comes out with so much more shine and sparkle. And so, yeah, I actually think having Saturn coming into the fifth house can be really great. So here's how I think you might choose to look at it. First of all, think about your self-expression. What is it that you would love to express about yourself? Who do you think yourself to be? Who do you find yourself to be? Like, if you love singing, do you want to sing more? If you like acting, if you like if you've got a hobby, like for me, astrology was always my thing, is always my thing. I'm going to be using Saturn. Say, okay, how can I improve? How can I improve my delivery? How can I improve, my output? And this is a time to make small but consistent steps every day. See, in the sign of Aries, and you've got an Aries imprint in your fifth house, that shows that in many ways you do want to lead the way with the thing that you're creative with. You do want to be dynamic and throw yourself into it, because the Aries energy is all about a single-minded focus, going headlong into something. So you absolutely are ready to go forwards and put all your energy and your fire into something new. But the Saturn energy, it's for all the push, there's a little pull, and he's pulling you back. And so what I would recommend is you see where you're going, you feel the warmth of that fire, that warmth of that motivation, that's definitely yours. But you make small little steps forwards, small quick steps, but lots of them. So you're not trying to barrel into something, complete it straight away. The idea here is to give yourself some time, give yourself some structure, maybe create a light structure around you that you can hang your creativity on. But if you're sort of creating for creation's sake, you might find actually that you end up feeling defeated, which is actually what happens when we have a Saturn test going on and we don't really apply ourselves. We often end up feeling self-defeated, and it's often because we don't have enough structure around us. So my suggestion, if you're wanting it, is to create a light structure around what it is you're trying to do. Give yourself small, achievable outcomes that you can measure, and that you can, like a SMART goal, basically, specific, measured, achievable, realistic, and timed. If I've remembered that correctly, who knows? It's a long time since I was doing management training for businesses and stuff. But yeah, set yourself tiny little goals that you can achieve, that you are able to feel that your fire can go into, and give them a go. But also ask yourself, where do I limit myself? Where do I feel that I'm not free to express myself? Where do I feel like I hold back? Where do I feel like I'm not good enough? These are all questions about your negative perceptions of yourself. And then once you get those bits of intel, once you start to tune into those answers, you might think, okay, this is a real development opportunity for me. This is where I can really start to flow with this new feeling. And that's when you might ask Saturn for some help. Now, I say ask Saturn like you can actually ask him. Well, you might find that there's some Saturnian people around you. Saturn is an elderly planet. He's got the appearance of an old man. So is there an older person in your profession or in the hobby or in your child's education or your child's life? Is there somebody around you who's older, reliable, responsible, has status, has experience, that has already traveled the path that you're going down? Is there somebody like that, a mentor that you can ask for help from? It doesn't have to be a man, but it's the Saturn energy is responsibility. And then you might also think to yourself, okay, what it is I'm creating right now, how can I be responsible for that myself? Because if you were, for instance, with me, everything I'm creating this year, if I'm creating it with the idea of I'm just creating it for creation's sake, it's not carrying that Saturn seed. Whereas if I think about it, I'm creating this because I would love to spread astrology far and wide and to help the next generation of astrologers feel inspired and supported. All of a sudden, the Saturn responsibility for what I'm creating takes on a new energy. And that's what I suggest you do, is that whatever you're being creative with and passionate about, you think of it in terms of how you can be responsible for it and take it on to the next level. And that's when Saturn's really going to work with you and really, really help you. So yes, Saturn does show up and he shows us where we need a bit of creative discipline. And yes, he can kick our butts if we're just expecting to be kind of irresponsible with the flow of passion and creativity. However, he actually could be about to push you forwards in such a way that you will move so much further than you ever thought you could. So this is amazing. Finally, final thoughts, where this will head when he goes into Taurus in 2028. Your life is likely to get a bit busier and need a little bit more structure. Maybe it's because everything that you've been creative about has created a bit of a momentum of its own. Maybe you've brought something to life, maybe a human even, like maybe you've started that family and you might need a bit more room. So as Saturn comes into the 6th house, it is time to get even more organized and start to really focus on the things that light you up and really let those things that are superfluous in your life to drop away. It's also a time when you'll be coming into looking after yourself a bit better, managing your life much more effectively. So yes, with this in mind, it makes even more sense to be responsible for your creativity, because as you do that, if you're always working with your passion in a way that's responsible, you'll be able to see where maybe it's got out of hand, or maybe where it throws your life out of kilter. So again, a key word here is review. Keep reviewing what you're doing, not so that you can put yourself down or go into defeat or anything like that, but just keep reviewing. Ask yourself, where do I need a bit more space in my life? Where do I need a bit more resources or whatever? You know, the more you're reviewing and you're aware of what's going on, the easier it will be when Saturn moves into Taurus. Now, I often find with understanding Saturn, it's also helpful to know where Saturn is in your birth chart. So, for instance, in my chart, he's in the 8th house. If you want to know more about your natal Saturn, I've got a playlist called Saturn Through the Houses. Give that a go, find it on YouTube, and that will give you a real key to how you manage responsibility. That and this forecast could really help you use the Saturn energy in the absolute best way. So wishing you loads of luck with that. If you want more support, you can connect with me via my free online community on school.com/feelgoodastrology. Again, the link's down below. And if you wanted to have a forecast with me, an actual consultation, again, just get in touch. All of my details are in the show notes. So have a good one and catch you next time. Bye for now. So if you're listening to this forecast, this is because you've got Saturn in your 4th house currently as it's gone into the sign of Aries. Now, there's a couple of different ways that might happen. So, and a lot of this depends on how you view your charts. If you're looking at your chart with a whole sign charting methodology, you'll have the whole of Capricorn in your 1st house and your ascendant there. And in fact, Saturn will be your ruling planet. So he's extra, extra strong. This transit is absolutely for you. If you have a Placidus charting system that you use, Most likely your ascendant is in the sign of Sagittarius, but you also have Capricorn in your first house. So however you've come to this forecast, this is really to explore how Saturn is going to influence your fourth house, especially in the sign of Aries. Now, in the sign of Aries, Saturn wants to make a change. He wants to make a difference. He's super active, really like fiery. And of course, you know, with your birth chart being as it is, Aries will take up some of your fourth house real estate. You know, the sign of Aries is about the energy, the single-mindedness, the warmth, but also the determination. And of course, Saturn coming into the fourth house. The fourth house is a really important house. You know, there's 4 angular houses and the fourth house is one of them. This is a life-changing house. This is the house of rootedness and groundedness. And so Saturn coming in here, I mean, there's nothing more grounding than a Saturn transit. Trust me. You know, his energy, if you think of him as a planet, he's got rings around them. Those rings are stopping that feeling of expansion. And they sometimes feel tight. They sometimes feel a little bit limited. And so a lot of people would say that when Saturn goes through the fourth house, it is a time when you tighten in your belt. I'm speaking directly from my experience now. I can remember the last time Saturn went here 30 years ago. And also, I've just had Saturn in my fourth house. So I can talk with some absolute credibility and experience. This is a time when you may well feel like a lot of your normal resources, your normal energy, and that feeling of trust in your family, in your home, starts to not fall apart exactly, but that things feel tighter. You know, Saturn really does his some of his most, I don't want to say damaging work because I don't want to catastrophize this, but you know, Saturn can feel quite judgmental wherever he is in the chart. And at the home and family level, which is what the fourth house represents, it can feel very difficult. So his transit here often is bringing up this need to become a lot more self-reliant, especially because you've got Aries here as well. This is a time when you might not get as much help from other people and you have to find those extra resources yourself. You might feel like you have to be the savior. You have to lead the family, lead the home, save the home. You might also find that things cost a bit more. So things break down and you have to get a new boiler, you have to get your boiler fixed, so on and so forth. So it can be a time when resources are a bit thinner on the ground. And you know, Saturn is a planet of responsibility. And so you may well also feel like you've got the weight of that responsibility on your shoulders. However, it is also a place of inner authority. You know, this is a place where we come into our own, where we actually realize how much strength and resourcefulness we have. And so this can also be a time when you turn it around, but it's not because of a handout. It's not usually because of somebody helping you necessarily. This is you inhabiting the ancient person in yourself. So for instance, you might be asking yourself, how did my grandparents deal with this? How did my parents deal with this? Or if there's somebody older or wiser or more significant than, you know, if there's somebody that you think has already resolved this problem, you might try channeling them during this transit. Similarly, because the fourth house is about the home and also our family, you might find during Saturn's transit here that you start to feel a little cooler. You know, wherever Saturn is, he shows where things are less fluffy and a lot more real. You know, so it's not all hot to trot. It's kind of like things are cooler. Things have to be a lot more kept on the practical level rather than fanciful level. This is a time where you've been sowing good seeds, your good seeds and your hard work and your good deeds start to come, and there's a yield from them. You know, everything that you've done really well and with persistence and with faith and with a feeling that you are going in the right way. Oh, I've just been bought some chocolate by a 7-year-old. Bravo. You can tell Saturn's just left my fourth house where I'm saying, oh, you might not have loads of stuff. You might not get handouts. And literally today he's gone into my fifth house of children. And look, I've got a bit of chocolate, minty aero as well. Bravo. Thank you, Solomon. So anyway, yeah, this is that is literally astrology in action there. Yeah, this is a time when you might start to channel your inner resourcefulness and become that ancient, become that elder person that you needed to be to make things work. Now, something that I think can also happen with this is you might feel a little lonely wherever Saturn goes, because he's kind of forcing you to be a bit self-reliant. And of course, in the home and family, again, you might feel a little like it's on your shoulders, it's on you, and you're alone, like you have nobody around to like share the weight with. Now, what I would say here is it's not normally true that you are on your own. It just feels like that. Saturn has this slightly depressing feel, especially if it's something that we're afraid to look at. Saturn, when we're not prepared to look at something, Saturn tends to make us, not make us, but the Saturn coolness tends to create a sort of depressing energy. But what I really recommend here is, because Saturn really rewards people who work with him. If you are able to get gentle, regular support from somebody older than you that you trust, somebody that's gone through all these kind of situations before, somebody that's lived their life and lived and lost, but has succeeded and moved on and moved up, someone that's dealt with the sort of complexity that you might be facing, then Saturn's going to reward you. So the first thing as an order of the day I would recommend is get a mentor of some sort. Find someone that you can trust who has had difficulty, and start to get their advice. This is a time when, if you dislike cutting back, and if you dislike being told what to do, or if you dislike not being able to be flamboyant and generous and wild and free, that you could feel like almost Saturn is a little bit of a punisher. But again, what he's teaching you here is that your life doesn't flourish just because of generosity. He's also showing you that your life can flourish even when you're not generous, or even when resources are tight. In many ways, he's showing you more different ways, more different skills that you've got to be able to survive. And he's showing you what is worth it, where you've got internal value. And he's also showing you where things are actually quite meaningless and frivolous, and he's also showing you how to cut that out of your life. So this is almost like boot camp. It's like boot camp for the home, boot camp for the body, boot camp for the family. And as you come out of this period, most likely you will have changed the way you're living in quite a big way. Just thinking if there's any other bits of advice I could give. Oh yeah. The 4th and the 10th houses are often seen as houses that relate to parents. And I often find that the 4th house often represents the more, I don't want to say the more feminine parent, but the one that's more home based. And I often find that the 10th house represents the parent that is a lot more authoritative and outward facing. Now, not all astrologers agree with that. Sometimes they've got it around the other way. But for me, from my experience, I think the more homeward parent is often represented by the 4th house. Interesting, when Saturn went into my 4th house, my 4th house parent started to sicken a little bit, it was an extra concern. So this is a really good time to rebuild any relationships with parents around you, in particular a parent that's more inward facing. This is a time to kind of make friends a little bit with your ancestors, because here you may find that your ancestors are struggling a little bit, that they are feeling a little bit under the weather and need a bit more support. And in doing so, you get something back. It's can't quite describe it, but to me, this is a bit of a roll call. This is maybe this is a time when you realize that maybe you're now the responsible one, and looking after them a little bit more. But to me, it feels like there's a change in the balance. So ultimately, this is you coming into a greater level of self-reliance, really trusting that you can handle the weight of the responsibility, even when there doesn't seem to be much apparent help at hand, and that you're also responsible for finding that extra help when you need it. Couple of other thoughts, and this is to orient it. Leading up to this, you're often called upon to be more, taking more responsibility in your local environment and within the community of friends around you. To me, that's almost like a training camp to get you ready to take on a lot more weight on your shoulders. Where this is going when Saturn moves into the sign of Taurus midway through 2028, what you'll find is you're ready to expand into the things that you're passionate about. And what you've been working on during this time is getting clearer about what you can achieve with very little, and the level of confidence that you'll build during this time. Because I guess it's a bit like, you know, when you survive something that feels like it could have threatened your security, you have just so much more faith in yourself, and that faith allows you to take bigger risks and allows you to self-express a bit more, which is what happens when Saturn comes into here. You're then finessing your self-expression. So this is a really critical part. This is a real turning point in the whole story of responsibility. This is a point where you learn just how strong you are, and also just how just how important your home and family are. You might even come to realize that what you needed in a family and what you needed in a home, a lot of it was superfluous. So this is a very reorienting time. So I hope that's helpful for you, Saturn. Now, I always find that when we're talking about Saturn, it's really helpful to understand where we are coming from as well. And if you want to learn about your natal Saturn, I've got a playlist called Saturn Through the Houses. Check it out. It's on YouTube, but there are 12 forecasts according to where it is in your birth chart. So check it out, have a listen. And between the two of them, that should be really giving you a Saturn master plan. If you need any further support from that, like if you want to book a consultation, my links are below. But mostly I'm offering support through my free community on school.com. That's skool.com/feel good astrology. So hopefully, if I don't speak to you directly, you're going to have loads of support. You're going to get this done. But if you need any, come and connect with me and my community real soon. Anyway, loads of love. Take care and catch you next time. Bye for now. Hey there. If you're listening to this forecast, it's because you've got Saturn in the sign of Aries in your third house right now. So that's for you. Now, that might be because if you've got a whole sign chart, when you look at your chart, you've got the whole of Aquarius in your first house. Or if you are somebody who has a Placidus chart, you might have Capricorn rising and also Aquarius in your first house. But either way, this is a forecast for understanding how Saturn in Aries is behaving in your third house. Now, Saturn's a really slow moving planet. It takes 29.7 years to go all the way around. And so he really talks about the overall journey of responsibility. He is currently here with Neptune as well, and he's in a lovely sort of configuration with Pluto and Uranus. So right now he's super strong. And, you know, Saturn is one of the rulers of Aquarius as well. So if you do have a strong Capricorn or Aquarius energy, he's your ruler. But he is absolutely working at full pelt right now in the sign of Aries. So what does this all mean for you? Well, to do that, I just want to unpack where he's just been in your second house, and also to give you a bit of a heads up as to where he goes in the fourth as well, and what that might mean, because he's going to be here for about 2.5 years, up until mid 2028, before he goes into the sign of Taurus. So he's going to be there a while. It's worth understanding the energies that he's bringing to the table. So wherever Saturn goes, He is bringing you a different side of a journey of responsibility. He is really showing you what you need to learn, and also showing you where you could be more discerning, more practical, where you could let go of a few more things and then really tend well to the things that count. So in many respects, he's teaching you how to be kind of conservative with your resources, how to make the most of what you've got, and also how to know the difference between something that's worth looking after versus something that's worth letting go of. So he really is teaching you discernment. It's not necessarily an easy lesson to learn, especially in the third house, because the third house is about our neighborhood. It's also about our learning. It's also about our siblings and our cousins and the people from our past. It's also about the narrative we've grown up with, and also that sense of belonging that you have in the town that you live in. And so, there's many ways that we can take responsibility in this third house, and there's lots of different ways that we can learn about discernment. And so here's some thoughts that could be helpful. Now, because he's in the sign of Aries as well, Aries adds in quite an interesting twist. Where he's been in the second house, Saturn's been teaching you about managing your resources really well, but also managing your confidence in such a way that you know your true value, and you can stand in your value, and that you can also not take things too personally. He gives you quite a good hard lesson in that. But the sign of Pisces that Saturn has been interacting with recently is a little bit higgledy-piggledy. It's a lot on good faith. It's a lot on the spiritual side of life. And so you may well have had a bit of a confrontation. You might have felt that your natural generosity was a really good thing. And Saturn's come in to show you that actually when you're overly generous and when you don't watch your resources with a bit more care, you can really come undone. And so he teaches you that, in quite a hard way. Now he's going into the sign of Aries. He's not necessarily trying to manage all these here, there, and everywhere kind of spiritual energies. What he's trying to do is contain the dynamics of the Aries energy, which is that you want to lead, you want to move forwards, you want to move forwards fast, that you're single-minded, that you're a dynamo, that you have. So, like your third house is expressed in a really Aries way, which is you will dive right into your community, you will throw yourself at things, you will get involved with what needs to be done, and you'll be, boom, there I am, like take me or leave me. And yet Saturn working with the sign of Aries is going to show you where when you throw yourself into something without thinking about the consequences, it's that rush, it's that Aries, I need to do it right now without checking any facts. That's the thing that trips you up. And so there's a certain amount of, yes, there's courage to interact with people, courage to connect. Absolutely. But there's also a wisdom that is coming into your life over the next 2.5 years to do with when to have that courage to connect, and also when to have the courage to stand in your own space and not connect, when to have the wisdom to separate yourself a little bit. And so it's going to be an interesting challenge, because your energy is to go all in terms of the community. So in many respects, the third house is also about our communications, all of our communications, so all our emails, all our social media, all the little conversations we might have with the neighbors, when we go to the local shops, the interactions that we have with people. With Saturn here, we need to be really aware of the cost of our words that they might have on us and what they might have on the community. I learned years ago, actually, and I was quite shocked by it. And it took me about 3 or 4 years to really fully understand it as well. But I remember chatting with a friend and sharing what I believed in. And she said, when you share your views, you're isolating anyone, or you're making people wrong who don't share the same views as you. And I was really shocked by this, because I was like, I'm not making anyone wrong. What are you on about? I didn't actually actively say that, but that's what I was thinking internally. I was thinking, I'm not making people wrong. That's not what I want to do. But the mere energy of saying your views so completely and fully, with so much gravitas and seriousness, because you really believe it, that in and of itself makes people wrong, or people can read it that you think they're wrong by inference. And I didn't realize that. But it occurs to me right now, with Saturn going into your third house, that is kind of true for you right now, that anywhere where you're holding your views with such strength, even if they're really honest to you, you may well get some fallout from people who find your words hurtful or upsetting. So this is like, how can I take responsibility for my words? How can I take responsibility for the people around me? And obviously, it's not your business what everyone's thinking. Similarly, it's not their business how they're affecting you. However, you might learn the cost of what happens when your words kind of fly out there and everywhere, or you might experience it the other way around, where other people's words might feel careless. To me, there's a whole dynamic here to explore. Now, when Saturn goes through the third house, I always think, wherever Saturn is, if you're using his energy and refining, working hard at something, Saturn will reward you. You know, when you ignore Saturn where he is, that's when I think things get tripped up, you know. Like, so for instance, if you're not working with the Saturn energy to build something, create something, to create a structure, to create respect within your community, I think if you're not working with that energy, you may well get pulled into it anyway, you know. So to me, it's like there's this flood of energy, and, you know, if you use it, it kind of works with you and flows with you. If you choose not to use it, it hits you anyway. So my advice is, whatever you're passionate about within your community, this could be a great time to start working within it, you know, start meeting with people, start offering your time in a way that feels consistent, in a way that feels respectful, in a way that feels like it's actually benefiting your community. Now, learning is a really strong theme in the third house as well. You know, it in many respects, it shows our early education and where we're learning what we should already know, you know, or what people deem we should know. And so this is also a time when you might be really thoughtful. So another way of using the energy here in a light-hearted way, without getting into those sort of difficult areas where people might say, oh my God, you think that? You must think I'm, you know, getting into those conflictions. You know, another way of using this might be just to set up a group, like nothing to do with viewpoints, nothing to do with political views, religious views, but maybe something where you can share, you know, like like taking part in a cookery class, or going on walks of different areas, or volunteering to plant trees or something like that. Because with that, you're creating something that will last. Like, the knowledge of it in your community will create some lasting effect that will be really beneficial for people. You know, like if you go to, I don't know, a class on like eating curry, like cooking great curry, or cooking amazing Italian dishes, or growing herbs and learning medicinal herbs, or something like that. You know, anything where there's nothing necessarily ideological behind it, but something that can be shared in a way that everyone could reach it and access it. To me, that's a really good use of that Saturn energy. If you've got nothing social planned, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, the third house also shows our day-to-day busyness. So you might find that this is just coinciding with a time where you're having lots of meetings with people because of your day-to-day life. You might be meeting a lot more people, being a lot more in the community, or being connected to a much bigger team inside your work. But again, the Saturn inference here is, how can you do it in a way that's more respectful, that's more measured, and where you have discernment? Now, this is something I want to talk about, because with that discernment, you might realize that there are lots of things that you're involved in your um in your community that actually no longer suit you. So for instance, you might have, I know, joined a wild swimming club, and you might also go dancing, like salsa dancing, like 3 times a week, and also go to the pub and shoot darts, not shoot pool or play darts. There's lots of different things you might do. You might realize actually some of this just doesn't match who you are right now. And so it's also a time to discern, refine, and let go of some of those things that just aren't really you anymore. So this isn't necessarily a very serious place to have Saturn coming in all honesty. The 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th, they're the times when Saturn is really working us hard. This is one of the ones where he's helping you adapt your style to get stronger in yourself. He's always giving us something to consider. But what I would leave you with is, after this experience, he's going to push you even deeper about personal responsibility and your sense of belonging. And that will be turned inward towards the home, and also the family. Now, this can often bring about a feeling of tightness in your resources when Saturn is in the 4th house. And so one thing that would be really helpful for you to do right now would be to start putting aside some things, putting aside some resources, not necessarily hoarding, but maybe getting your money in order, making sure everything's fixed and functional. I mean, you might actually find it helpful doing swaps of energy, like helping garden other people's homes, so that they can help with you as well, or you might be developing a community garden that, if and when Saturn is in the 4th house and things feel a bit tighter, there's free access to loads and loads of vegetables that you've grown yourself. To me, this would be a really fantastic time to start sowing the seeds of resources that you might need in a couple of years' time, or the skills that you might need in a couple of years' time, like how to fix a boiler, or how to fix a car, or how to do X, Y, and Z. Because the matters of the home and the family are more important when Saturn is going through here. So that's a whistle-stop tour of Saturn in the 3rd house. Wherever he is creating limitations and tests, and he's also asking us to grow stronger and gain wisdom. So I think, this is an easy way to gain some wisdom, actually. Now, if you do want to know more about Saturn in your birth chart, and I highly recommend you do, because when we understand our Saturn, we understand so much about our own levels of determination, perseverance, our ability to reflect on what we've done, reflect on consequences. And I think that teaches us loads. I've got a series called Saturn Through the Houses. It's a different playlist within my channel here on Feel Good Astrology. But check out, if you know where your Saturn is natally, there's a forecast there for you already. If you want more support than that, feel free to book a session with me. I do sessions every Friday. But it's on a first come, first served basis. All my details are below. And if you want some more interaction, if you'd like more of a community feel, which Saturn is in a place of community right now, then you might want to join my free community on the platform called School. That's SKOOL.com. So simply click on that link, or even go to that QR code, scan that, and come and join me over on School, and I'll welcome you heartily there. So anyway, have a good one. And catch up with you all soon. Lots of love. Bye for now. So if you've currently got Saturn in the sign of Aries in your 2nd house, this forecast is for you. Now, you might find, if you've got a whole sign chart, that all of Pisces fits in your 1st house. So you might have your Pisces ascendant. However, you could also have Aquarius ascendant and have a Placidus chart, and also find yourself with Saturn in Aries in your second house. However you find yourself with Saturn in Aries in your second house, this is for you. So what I'm going to do is give you some keywords to understand this energy and how it might manifest, but also give you some suggestions on how to handle this energy. My understanding and experience of Saturn is, he is always there. That energy of the Saturnian tests, the Saturnian measurement and discernment, it's always going to be showing up somewhere in our life. And right now for you, it's showing up in the second house, which has a lot to do with your earnings, how you feel about your earnings, how responsible you are for your earnings, but also how responsible you are for feelings of self-worth and self-confidence. Saturn, wherever he goes, he can often have a limiting and possibly debilitating effect in our birth charts. And in the sign of in the part of your chart to do with money and self-worth, the last thing you need is to feel debilitated or punished. And so I really want to sort of suggest some ways that you can work with Saturn in a way that's going to help you and to avoid some of those feelings of scarcity and punishment that can sometimes come with this. So I really want to start the story by just recapping on what you've just learned from him being in your first house and also from him being in the sign of Pisces. So when Saturn goes into the first house often, and this will be, he would have been there. He was in the sign of Pisces for 2.5 years. So during that time, you would have been learning about the stories about yourself coming apart a little bit. And also when Saturn goes through your first house, you often feel quite tired, quite old, creaky. Also, the sense of responsibility about your own life can become quite heavy. I remember the last time Saturn was in my first house, I was really feeling what happened if I had full responsibility for my family. How would I do it? What happens if I was ill? What happens if I couldn't do, so a lot about your personal sense of power and agency. There's such strong key terms that Saturn really challenges in the first house. So, first of all, congratulations, you've got through him in your first house. And the chances are you've developed some habits along the way and developed some different ways of thinking about it. So like when he's done that, when he's put you through the test, he then sees how that applies to your earning. You see, in the first house, we're learning to become comfortable in ourselves. We're learning about our aura, our appearance, our energy that people meet when they see us. It's really about our identity. And so Saturn going through there will have smartened you up in one way or another. And, anywhere where things were really undefined would have got quite defined, I would say. But now he's in the second house. You're wanting to grow on that new definition that you've created for yourself. And so that's the place to start, most likely. So first of all, in terms of earning, as Saturn comes in, you often start to think about how much money you're earning, how much money you would like to earn, and how sometimes it feels quite heavy to do all that earning. It sometimes feels like you're doing all this work and the money's not really coming in. It can be quite self-defeating. And so the whole earning thing, how much energy do you want to put in to earn money? And so Saturn here really, and because it's in the sign of Aries, and Aries likes to go to war on things, you might find that given the Pisces personality, that you want to make money in quite a few different ways. You'll probably find when you look at things that you've got this side of what you do, and this side of what you do, and this side of what you do, and this side of what you do. And yet Saturn, especially in the sign of Aries, is asking you to choose and to focus and to go with the thing where there's the least amount of resistance. So you might find that there's a real pull for you to focus on one thing and one thing only, not lots of things, because Saturn, he really likes for things to get defined. So does Aries. Saturn also likes to consider the whole journey. So does Aries, although Aries likes to do it just like that, whereas Saturn spreads it out over years. And so what Saturn is asking you about your earnings right now is to have a direction. And it's the direction with the least amount of resistance. It's not the direction that feels like it might be spiritual. It's not necessarily the direction that feels like it's the most generous. It's not necessarily the thing that feels like you're earning brownie points with God. No, it's that side of you that can easily deliver something of value to another person. And Aries here is no fluff. So this is really, I think, asking you to focus on your no fluff earnings, your no fluff, straight to the point kind of way of earning money. And so it could be quite helpful to set yourself really small goals that you can easily achieve, little steps along the way, and to narrow your scope, narrow your window so that you are literally just focusing on one or two things. Now, it's also quite helpful, I think, to get feedback. Now, Aries style feedback from the second house could be quite devastating. It's almost a bit like getting feedback from someone that doesn't like you. It's not to say anything untoward about Aries, but the energy of fire is that honesty, straightforward, straight to the heart of the matter. And I saw a tip actually on a video on YouTube talking about using AI to get a different perspective. You know, whilst Saturn is in your second house, he's also wanting you to upgrade your skills, not just keep them as is. You know, wherever Saturn is going, he is asking you to work harder. Make no mistake, he's asking you to work harder for sure. But he will be expecting you to review how you're earning things and to put in a bit of a development plan for yourself. And one thing that I saw on a video was to ask AI for feedback. Now, if you've used AI, you'll probably know that AI tends to favor blowing smoke up your backside and flattering you and saying, oh, what a wonderful idea. Yes, the world definitely needs this. And you do that, and then you realize the world doesn't need it at all. But you can use AI to ask for really good feedback, like ask AI to give you feedback for a friend, you know, so it doesn't think it's giving you feedback, but it's giving feedback to a third party. So you could say, oh, somebody I know has got this idea, find all the loopholes, what would not work very well, and look for the critical, you know, the critical factors. And so I think Saturn here is not only asking you to define yourself, but also refine yourself. Worst case scenario, like if you really want to go to town on yourself, ask AI to give it to you Gordon Ramsay style. Like, what would Gordon Ramsay say about your new business plan? And you'll really get it. But, you know, the important thing here is whatever comes back is information. It's not there to damage your self-esteem. If anything, what you're working on here is how to boost yourself up. But of course, if you're resting on your laurels and not allowing Saturn to talk to you and nudge you forwards and nudge you to improve, you're missing a trick, because he really will stand you in good stead. So yeah, narrow your focus, get tailored feedback in small doses, and then ask yourself, you know, ask a Saturn type person around you. Is there a business person around you? Is there somebody who's already dealt with all of the earning problems that you've ever encountered, you know, that you're encountering right now? Is there somebody that you can ask for help and feedback? Saturn often shows up as an older person in our life. So yeah, ask that person for some feedback. You might also find, given that Saturn's in your second house, that your earnings are going to come through older people, you know, so you might appeal to a much older audience. Now, when it comes to self-worth, your self-worth is likely to build a lot more from doing things consistently and gaining a sense of reliability and what's the word I'm looking for? Persistence. So the more persistently you're doing things, I think the more likely you are to feel that sense of self-worth and deservability. And so that's another gift that Saturn can give you. Now, a word of caution here. This isn't a time when Saturn's going through your second house to make massive purchases, not unless you've got a really wealthy chart in the first place and you've got other really helpful aspects going on right now to your chart. But Saturn in the second house is usually seen as a sort of cautionary tale that it is time to put money aside, start making savings, start allocating cash in a different way, start seeing your resources in a completely different light. Because Saturn here is, again, more likely to reward you than punish you. But if you're spending your money left, right, and center, don't be surprised if all of a sudden, the stock exchange bombs or, something terrible happens, because Saturn in the second house is also known for creating a time of real resource backups. So there's a few tips and ideas about working with that Saturn energy to help you. Once you've mastered this, and Saturn is allocated for 2.5 years per sign, he will be going into the sign of Taurus, and hitting into that third house energy in your chart. Now, that third house energy is going to be looking at how you can contribute and share some of your skills within the wider community. So everything that you're building for yourself now, especially in building your self-esteem, will really stand you in good stead when Saturn goes into the third house. So that's also helpful to know, that what you're doing for yourself right now could have a much more lasting appeal and could really assist you. So I hope that's helpful. I also think that it's important to channel your inner Saturn. And if you know where your Saturn is in your birth chart, now might be a really good time to check it out. So if you're interested, I've got a playlist called Saturn Through the Houses. Give it a listen to, find your episode according to where Saturn is. And that will tell you a lot about how you approach persistence, discernment, and those challenges of restrictions. Anyway, if you need any further support, all of my details are below. I still do consultations, so mostly I can be found in my free online community. So join me there as well. Anyway, loads of love, have fun, and catch up with you soon. Bye for now. So there you have it. There's a few thoughts about Saturn going into Aries. Like I said right at the start, I really do think we're closing off on a 30-year loop here, especially seeing as the two Saturn ingresses into the sign of Aries match so many different patterns. And like I also shared as well, it really does feel like there is a change of tone, in particular about fertility, the morality of the sanctity of life issues, and also the sort of disappearance of the woman and the sort of uprush of the strong man. To me, they all seem like really big repeating themes going on right now. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. If you do want more support, feel free to join me in my community on school.com. That's skool.com/feelgoodastrology. I have to say I'm spending most of my time there. For me, and this is quite a Saturnian thing, isn't it? I really want to build a resource that can provide support for people, as many people as possible, and to share in the learning of astrology. One of the things I've been doing since January is I'm teaching astrology every week. Every week, we look at one subject, just one subject, because this is beginner's astrology. The funny thing is, even though I've been studying it for years and years and years, and first picked up an astrology book when I was 11, so it's 40 years ago, even now, just looking at one thing from a beginner's perspective, I'm learning so much. So, currently, and if you're interested, you can join the premium membership on my school community. But at the moment, we're looking at one sign per week. So far, we are up to Leo, and each week we will study that particular sign in a group. And then later in a second session, look at where Leo is in our chart, or Aries or Taurus, etc. Every week we're going through. In term 2, we're going to be looking at the houses and going deep, again, one house per week. And then after that, we'll be doing planets and aspects. But there's also other sessions that I do. So in between, we do sessions talking about different planetary aspects coming up at the moment. Like last week I did one about the eclipses. So there's just so many different ways that we can connect and enjoy astrology together and make it mean something. I really think that there's so much going on, and yes, that's why you can find me in my community. So if you want some of that extra support around really lovely people online, then please do just come and join me there. But anyway, have a good one. Enjoy this Saturn ingress in Aries, and I'll catch up with you real soon. Lots of love. Bye for now.